Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Jessica Knott. Jessica Knott was born on June 22, 1986, in Allamont Springs, Florida. She grew up in a loving family with her parents, an older brother, and a younger sister. Her father worked in construction and often traveled to other states for work, so her mother mainly took care of her and her siblings. Throughout her childhood, Jessica was a cheerful and active girl who loved playing outdoors with her friends and siblings and had a special love for animals. On April 5, 1996, when Jessica was 9 years old, her family planned to visit her grandparents for Easter. While her mother packed for the trip, her father went to the store to buy some vacation items. Jessica asked her mother if she could go to the yard to wait for her father to return. Her mother agreed but told her to stay in the yard and not wander off. The family's apartment complex was located in a quiet area, surrounded by many trees and away from the main road. The neighborhood was considered safe, and children often played outside without regular adult supervision. However, when Jessica's father returned home around 6 p.m., he asked his wife where Jessica was, and she was surprised to learn that Jessica was not in the yard as she had thought. The parents searched the yard but couldn't find their daughter Jessica. Growing increasingly worried, they started asking neighbors if they had seen Jessica. A neighbor reported seeing Jessica sitting on a bench, reading a book, but this information yielded no results. As night began to fall and Jessica was still missing, her parents contacted the police. The police quickly began search operations, questioning neighbors and canvassing the surrounding area. Despite their best efforts, they were unable to find Jessica, forcing the police to expand their search to nearby streets. A few hours later, the police received an unexpected call from an unknown number. The caller's voice was distorted by background noise. But the police determined that Jessica might have been near a water pumping station several miles from her home. When the police arrived at the water pumping station, they witnessed a horrifying scene. Jessica's body was discovered near the pumping station, hidden in a black trash bag. This location was only a few meters from the road, but the pumping station was located under a bridge, making it nearly impossible to detect. Next to the body were some magazines and a children's mirror. The police quickly identified the victim as Jessica Knott and handed her body over to the medical examiner for further investigation. Investigators turned their attention to tracing the 911 call, which they believed was made by the killer. Their goal was to use the call to identify the killer. However, the call was made from a public phone at a nearby gas station, and when the police arrived, the perpetrator had already fled. Detectives tried to take fingerprints, but it was a difficult task because this was a public phone booth, which likely had many fingerprints from different users. In addition, it was possible that the killer had wiped the phone clean after calling or had worn gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints. Further investigation revealed that Jessica may have been killed elsewhere and her body moved to the water pumping station. Evidence on the ground showed that the killer pulled the body out of the car, then put it in a trash bag and dragged it to the water pumping station. Jessica's clothes were still intact, except for a missing shoe, which was not found at the scene. The only potential clue at the crime scene was tire tracks on the ground. There was a possibility that they belonged to the killer's car, so the police took photos and analyzed the prints. Meanwhile, a medical examination of the body showed that the victim died from strangulation, with marks on the face and neck indicating the killer used bare hands. An autopsy showed that Jessica had eaten a hamburger shortly before her death. Her mother said she did not give Jessica a hamburger that day, suggesting the killer may have provided her with food. Additionally, forensic experts found no evidence of sexual assault, leaving the killer's motive unknown. Initially, police had suspected Jessica's parents of being involved in her disappearance because they had not had a solid alibi. Jessica's mother had claimed that she had packed up the apartment, and her father had claimed that he had been out shopping, so they clearly had had the opportunity to commit the crime. The police had been confused as to how the killer had been able to get Jessica out of the yard without anyone noticing or her screaming, leading them to believe that the killer might have been someone Jessica knew and trusted, and she might have voluntarily left with them. The killer's voice on the 911 call had provided another clue. In the recording, experts had detected feelings of grief and remorse, suggesting that the killer had truly felt remorse for his actions. The fact that the killer had taken the risk of calling 911 suggested that they might have been trying to minimize guilt or manipulate the investigation. However, the obvious sadness in the killer's voice had led investigators to believe that the killer had likely been remorseful for his actions. The investigation had reached a turning point when police had found a roll of black garbage bags in the trunk of Jessica's father's car, similar to the bag used to dispose of the victim's body. However, expert examination had shown that the bags had come from another manufacturer, eliminating Jessica's father as a suspect. The focus of the investigation had then turned to other suspects. Forensic experts had conducted a thorough examination of the victim's clothes and body, thereby obtaining many clues. One notable discovery had been that there had been a significant amount of dog hair on Jessica's clothes, even though her family had not owned dogs. This suggested that the dog hair might have come from the perpetrator's dog. Additionally, human hair of an unidentified man had been found on Jessica's body, and experts had been working to extract the DNA profile from the sample. However, this process had taken several days. Further examination had revealed two strange fibers on Jessica's clothes that experts had analyzed and determined likely had originated from car seat covers and carpets. This finding had supported the theory that Jessica had been killed at a location other than the water pumping station and then transported there by car. To determine the breed of dog that had shed hair on Jessica's clothes, experts had used the FBI's specialized database, which contained microscopic photos of hair from many different dog breeds. By comparing fur samples with a database, experts had determined that the fur had belonged to a Shar-Pei. This discovery had suggested that the perpetrator might have owned the Shar-Pei and that the dog's fur had been transferred to Jessica's clothes at the perpetrator's home or in the car. According to investigators' initial theory, the killer might have lured Jessica into his car, taken her to buy hamburgers at McDonald's, and then taken her to his home, where she had been murdered. To aid the investigation, experts had tried to improve the quality of the phone call recordings, but this had proved difficult. They had decided to try a different approach and sought help from NASA, which had advanced audio enhancement tools originally designed for use in space recordings. NASA had agreed to assist and provide police with higher quality audio. However, experts still needed to sample the suspect's voice to compare with the call recording. Detectives had suspected that the killer might have known Jessica, so they had played the call recording for her mother, hoping she could recognize the voice. At first, she had said the voice was familiar but couldn't place it. When she had heard it a second time, she suddenly had realized that the voice belonged to a neighbor who had lived in their complex. Although she couldn't remember his name, she had told detectives that he often had taken his Shar-Pei for walks in the yard. Police had quickly identified this man as James Crow, 35 years old. Hours after Jessica had disappeared, investigators had questioned her neighbors, including James Crow. James had told them that he had seen Jessica in her yard while walking his dog, Pumpkin, a Shar-Pei. They had exchanged a few words and then he had left. Detectives had looked into his past and had found no history of criminal activity. He used to be a truck driver, but had been currently unemployed and had spent most of his time walking around the neighborhood with his dog. Detectives realized that the similarity in voice and breed of dog had not been enough to arrest James, so they obtained a search warrant for James' car. Inside, they found two disturbing clues. Under the front passenger seat, they discovered an empty Happy Meal bag, which was suspicious because James had no children and Jessica had had a McDonald's hamburger in her stomach. Additionally, The car had had brand new tires that had barely been used, which James had claimed to have changed on the day Jessica was murdered. However, his previous tire had not been very old and could have lasted a few more years. Police investigated further and discovered that one of James' old tires had been left behind at an auto service. When they compared the tire tread pattern to prints found near Jessica's body, they did not match. However, it was possible that tire marks on the ground did not belong to the killer's car but to another vehicle. Police also searched James' apartment, where they found a box containing several rolls of trash bags similar in size and color to the one found on Jessica's body. To determine if there was any connection between the bags, detectives needed to find a way to prove that they had come from the same manufacturer. At first, this seemed impossible, as the bags had had no distinctive markings or features and there were hundreds of manufacturers of similar products. The detectives had had an idea to solve this problem. They contacted Roberts, a quality control specialist for the company that had manufactured the bags found in James' apartment. Roberts pinpointed the factory that had produced the bags based on a special code on the cardboard box containing the rolls. The code indicated that the product had come from a facility in Virginia. Roberts explained that a small amount of iron or titanium was added to the bag's composition, depending on its color. Because the factory produced bags in many different colors, the materials used in production changed constantly, causing the ratio of plastic and iron or titanium to change daily. To take advantage of this information, experts used high-intensity X-rays to measure the presence of iron and titanium in the plastic of handbags from the suspect's apartment and the crime scene. This analysis provided exact ratios of elements, which were identical in both bags. This suggested the bags had been made on the same day and possibly from the same batch. However, there was more to the story than that. During the production of garbage bags, microscopic debris accumulated on the machine and imprinted on the plastic sheets as they were rolled out. This created a unique stripe pattern on each bag, visible to the naked eye. Even though the debris on the conveyor belt was constantly changing, creating a new pattern every few hundred feet of fabric, the results were consistent enough to provide another possible lead in the investigation. The similarity of the bags suggested that not only had they been produced in the same batch, but they had also been produced within a short time frame, perhaps just a few hours apart. Comparison of the bags from the suspect's apartment and the crime scene revealed a striking match in the lines and patterns on the bags. On further inspection, experts showed that the bags had been rolled into bundles by machine, which could have created irregularities during the rolling process. Although these irregularities were hardly noticeable, they could be detected by examining the edges of the bag, where the folds formed a unique pattern. Upon re-examining the bags, experts discovered that the pattern on the bags at the suspect's apartment matched the pattern at the crime scene. Further analysis also revealed that fibers found on Jessica's clothing had matched the carpet in James' apartment and the upholstery of his car seat. An audio expert had also analyzed the 911 call recording and compared it to James's voice sample, concluding that the voice in the recording belonged to James. Although the evidence was only circumstantial, detectives still believed in James' involvement in the case and decided to arrest him. James was taken into custody, and the prosecution announced its intention to seek the death penalty. Despite James continuing to deny guilt, the case still went to trial. The prosecution presented its theories, highlighting James' frequent outdoor activities with his dog, which had earned him the trust of local children, including Jessica. According to police, James had met Jessica while walking his dog and had struck up a conversation. He offered to take her to McDonald's, and she agreed because she knew him. After the meal, James allegedly invited Jessica to his home. While his wife was away, evidence had shown that Jessica was actually at James's house that day, as fibers from his living room carpet were found on her clothes. The investigation revealed that James might have tried to attack Jessica, but something went wrong. Forensic evidence indicated that the killer had strangled Jessica with their bare hands and pressed their palms against her face, possibly to silence her if she tried to scream. Panicked, the killer then placed Jessica's body in a trash bag and transported it to their car without arousing suspicion from the neighbors. The killer dumped her body near a water station, called 911 from a nearby gas station, and returned home. During the preliminary hearings, James's attorneys attempted to defend the evidence, arguing that there was no concrete proof of James' guilt. Although the judge accepted the evidence, the defense pointed out that in murder cases, the standard of proof is higher and more direct. Therefore, the possibility that James could avoid the death penalty was very large. A plea agreement was offered to James based on the circumstances surrounding the case. The deal required him to plead guilty to second-degree murder and accept a sentence of 40 years in prison without parole, thereby avoiding the death penalty. 2 years after the murder, in the summer of 1998, James accepted the deal. Although he was not required to provide details about the crime, he said that one of the reasons he accepted the deal was to spare Jessica's family the torment of the trial. The prosecution believed James showed genuine remorse for his actions and used the 911 call as evidence. The purpose of the call was unclear, but it suggested James was trying to alleviate his guilt. However, Jessica's parents were not satisfied with this deal because they had hoped for the death penalty and wanted James to confess to the crime. Despite this, James remained silent about the details of his actions. James did not fully serve his sentence. He died in November 2011 at the age of 49 from health problems, taking with him details of his crimes and motives. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Borden family. Michael and Catherine met in school, bonding over homework and walks. They became inseparable friends, sharing secrets and learning from each other. Their friendship blossomed into romance, and Michael eventually asked Catherine on a date, declaring his love. They got married in a beautiful ceremony, vowing to love each other through life's ups and downs. After 10 years, the Borden family moved to Lititz, Pennsylvania, a peaceful town founded by the Moravian Church in 1756. The town's faithful residents, including Amish families, sought refuge from modern chaos, living simply and avoiding modern tech. The devout Bordens chose Lititz for its ideal setting to raise children, surrounded by calm and serenity. Michael was an active member of the local church community, where he taught Sunday school lessons. His wife Catherine managed the household and supported him in his community work. While he focused on spiritual growth, Michael also worked as a manager at a printing company to provide for their everyday needs. Over time, they had 5 children, 3 boys and 2 girls. Large families like theirs were common in Lititz, where parents hoped to protect their children from the outside world's hardships and dangers. Regular church attendance, youth groups, and homeschooling were a big part of family life. Interactions between families were mostly limited to religious gatherings and celebrations. Michael and his wife built a peaceful home life, raising their kids in faith and discipline. When their eldest sons left for university, the 3 younger kids continued homeschooling, pleasing their parents. Neighbors and friends praised the kind, responsive, and interesting kids: Kara, Caitlin, and Daniel. Kara, the eldest daughter, challenged traditional values in her teens. Despite her dad's disapproval, she joined the soccer team, snuck out to discos, and did forbidden things. Her dad was troubled, and talks often ended in arguments and her running away. Kara sought romantic relationships and showed interest in boys. In 2005, David, 18, and Kara, 14, connected at a homeschooling support group. They formed a close bond, hiding it from their parents, and used social media to exchange messages, pouring their hearts out. They crafted coded messages to keep their communication private. Kara and David's letter exchange wasn't enough, so they secretly met in person. At first, they took innocent walks, but their friendship blossomed into romance. They snuck out to discos, spending nights together. David, older, had experienced first love, while Kara's inexperience made her feelings overwhelming. Her joy was radiant, but her obedience to her parents was feigned, driven by fear of discovery. But sooner or later, every secret is exposed. One day, Kara couldn't keep her secret hidden anymore and confided in her sister. She showed her a photo of David, told her about how they met and how they were deeply in love and willing to overcome all obstacles to be together. They were even planning to run away to be together. However, Kara's sister was worried about her and told their mother about their planned elopement, which ultimately revealed the secret of the young lovers. One early morning, Kara snuck back home, feeling elated after her date with David. But her mother was waiting in her room, clearly aware of her secret. At breakfast, Kara's parents forbade her from seeing David, deeming him unsuitable due to their concerns about violence and drugs. Angry and disappointed, Kara's father grounded her. That night, Kara spent her free time at David's house. At 5:30 a.m., David drove Kara back to her neighborhood and dropped her off near her house. They agreed that once Kara was safely back in her room, she would send him a text message to let him know she was okay. However, the message never came. David tried calling her home phone several times and sent her a few messages on social media, but he didn't hear back from her. An hour later, Kara finally got in touch with him, explaining that she had gotten caught by her parents and asked him to come over so they could talk to him. David arrived on time, but Kara's parents were fiercely opposed. Her dad forbade David from seeing Kara, deeming her too young for a relationship. David's declarations of love fell flat, with her dad threatening to call the police if he saw them together again. The emotional confrontation ended with Kara grounded and David leaving, feeling rejected and heartbroken for the first time. The lovers' separation was agonizing. They devised a plan to deceive everyone by pretending to break up while secretly continuing their affair. In public, they convincingly played the part of former lovers, not even greeting each other. Kara's parents were convinced they'd protected her from a youthful mistake. However, David missed Kara terribly, often reading Shakespeare and imagining openly serenading her like Romeo. David Ludwig took drastic measures by calling Kara's home to request a meeting with her father, Michael. On November 13, 2015, the young man arrived at the Borden residence, determined to discuss their plans to get married. Ludwig confessed his love for Kara and their intentions to Michael, but he received a dismissive response, saying it would never happen. Prepared for this reaction, Ludwig, fueled by anger, pulled out a handgun and shot Michael in the back as he walked towards the front door. Next, he targeted Kara's mother, Catherine, shooting her while she sat in a chair. Ludwig then searched the house for Kara, calling out her name, but she was nowhere to be found. He got into his car, started the engine, and began to drive away. That's when he spotted Kara running down the road towards him. She got into the car, expressing her desire to escape and start a new life with David. They fled the city in David's red car, leaving the chaos behind. Kara Borden was missing for 24 hours after her parents, Michael and Catherine Borden, were found dead. Investigators reviewed surveillance footage, which led them to track the teenagers. The footage also showed that Kara didn't resist and had willingly gone with David Ludwig. As a result, the charges against Ludwig for abducting Kara were dropped. Alerts were issued to police across the East, including in Pennsylvania and Indiana, as the couple was spotted heading west in a red Volkswagen Jetta. On Monday morning, authorities received a tip about a vehicle matching the description parked near a truck stop outside Fort Wayne. Police rushed to the area, but the car was already gone. State police were alerted, and they spotted the car around noon on Interstate 70 in Belleville. David Ludwig got onto the interstate, leading police on a high-speed chase at 90 to 95 miles per hour on a two-lane highway. According to State Trooper David Couch, who was involved in the pursuit, Ludwig drove extremely recklessly and dangerously, causing multiple accidents, much like in an action movie. The district attorney announced that, Despite the initial kidnapping charge being dropped, they would still face charges for the brutal murder of Michael and Catherine Borden. David Ludwig and Kara Beth Borden went on the run following the tragic incident, evading authorities for approximately 28 hours before being apprehended in Indiana. While Kara Beth was not charged with any crime, David Ludwig was detained without bail, facing charges of murder and abduction. In the aftermath, Kara was taken in by relatives and church members for care. David Ludwig was arrested on November 14, 2005, following a high-speed chase that ended with his vehicle crashing into a tree. He was charged with the murder of the Bordens, a crime allegedly committed after a prolonged dispute. Ludwig confessed to 2 counts of intentional harm, stating that he had deliberately intended to shoot the Bordens if they got in his way, and that he did so. During a search of his vehicle after his arrest, no weapons were found. However, when the police searched his home, they discovered an arsenal of 54 firearms, which belonged to his father, a hunter who had taught Ludwig how to handle weapons. The police also found an 18-minute video on a laptop in his home, which showed Ludwig discussing plans to invade another family's home, armed with weapons. The plan was abandoned due to the presence of too many cars. Although the police declared Kara Borden a victim in the case, Ludwig claimed that surveillance footage from various stores along their route would prove that she was not abducted. He did not resist extradition to Pennsylvania, and a judge ordered him held without bail. Ludwig was not represented by an attorney during the charge presentation, and a preliminary hearing was set for November 23rd. The trial of Ludwig, who was responsible for the deaths of 2 adults in front of their children, was brief, as detailed in court documents. Caitlin, Kara's 13-year-old sister, told investigators that her parents were killed after arguing with David Ludwig for about an hour. According to Caitlin, Ludwig shot her father, and she then ran to the bathroom where she heard a second shot, which likely killed her mother. Afterwards, Ludwig ran through the house, calling out to Kara. In June 2006, David Ludwig agreed to a plea deal with District Attorney Donald R. Totoro, who had originally sought the death penalty. As a result, Ludwig pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder, among other charges, and was immediately sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences of 9.5 to 19 years. He was also ordered to pay $125,000 in restitution. Since 2006, Kara Borden has been under guardianship, represented by legal counsel. In November 2005, it was reported that the charge of abduction against David G. Ludwig was dropped. The court concluded that Kara had voluntarily left with Ludwig, as supported by written statements. Ludwig's lawyer claimed that Kara had accompanied David voluntarily during their journey through 3 states, and surveillance footage showed that she had multiple opportunities to escape. Kara herself admitted that she had run after Ludwig as he left her house. Kara Beth Borden was identified as a victim in this tragic situation, and as a result, the Lancaster County District Attorney did not file criminal charges against her. This decision was influenced by her actions during the investigation and the digital evidence collected from emails, blogs, and texts exchanged with Ludwig. A memorial service was held at Lancaster Bible College, where Kara Beth, surrounded by her siblings, mourned the loss of her parents. As a sign of respect and remembrance, the neighborhood adorned their mailboxes with white ribbons. This tragedy left 5 children without the guidance and love of their parents. David Ludwig was transferred to Indiana's State Correctional Institution at Pine Grove to serve his life sentence for murdering his girlfriend's parents. He was chosen for the prison's youthful offender program, designed for inmates 15 to 20, which focuses on teaching self-responsibility, discipline, and respect for others. David Ludwig, now 37, is serving 2 life sentences for fatally shooting Michael and Catherine Borden in 2005 after they barred him from seeing their 14-year-old daughter. He cited the 2012 U.S. Supreme Court ruling against life imprisonment for minors, but the PA Supreme Court denied his petition, agreeing with a lower court that he's not entitled to same consideration, since he was 18 at the time. David Ludwig will spend life in prison. The community struggled to understand how well-raised kids committed evil. Despite Christian homeschooling, tragedy struck, leaving questions if parents overlooked or failed to convey values. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Maria Munoz. Maria Munoz was born on January 25, 1989, to Marisol Rodriguez and Jorge Luis Munoz, and was one of 3 children. Growing up in a loving and vibrant household in Puerto Rico, Maria faced a devastating loss when her mother passed away at a young age. It was around this time that she met Joel Pellet. Despite this hardship, Maria took on the responsibility of caring for her siblings, Marisol Munoz and Peter Hernandez. Maria and Pellet, who was 11 years older, initially met in Puerto Rico, where Maria was born and raised. At the time, Pellet was a nursing student with ambitious dreams, and Maria was also pursuing a nursing career. Despite their age difference, they got married in 2011. Following their marriage, the couple relocated to Laredo, Texas, where Pellet secured a prestigious position as a nurse anesthetist at a local hospital, earning a substantial income. Their newfound financial stability enabled them to live a life of opulence, marked by luxury cars and extravagant vacations. Maria Munoz, a devoted mother, lived in Laredo, Texas, with her husband Joel Pellet, 40, and their 2 young sons. After leaving her job, she dedicated herself to caring for her family full-time. Maria adored her boys and prioritized their needs, taking them to the park daily and reading to them before bedtime. Although she savored every moment at home, she also made time for her passion, playing the piano. Despite her contentment, Maria held on to her aspiration of furthering her education and resuming her nursing career. Pellet's relationship seemed perfect, but beneath the surface, a different story emerged. After his second son's birth in 2018, people noticed changes in his behavior. He lost weight, gained muscle, and became flirtatious with other women. He stopped posting family photos, instead sharing solo pictures, giving the impression of a single, carefree life. Pellet's colleagues noticed his growing closeness to surgical nurse Janet Arando. As time passed, it became clear they were having a secretive affair. In 2020, Maria found airline tickets Pellet bought for himself and Janet to travel to Europe. This discovery left Maria shattered, feeling betrayed and devastated by their decade-long facade. She sought a therapist's help to cope with her emotional turmoil and was prescribed medication to support her mental health struggles. Around this time, Maria started writing in journals to cope with her thoughts and feelings. As tensions between Pellet and Maria increased, a confrontation occurred on September 19, 2020, when Maria visited Janet's house and found Pellet's car parked in the driveway. Maria confronted Pellet, forcing him to choose between her and Janet. Pellet chose Janet, leading to an argument that prompted Janet to call the police. However, Maria and Pellet had left before the police arrived. Later, the police called Maria while she was in the car with Pellet, and they could hear him yelling at her in the background. Once they got home, Pellet's anger escalated, and he punched a hole in Maria's car windshield, demonstrating his intense anger. The next morning, on September 20th, Maria sent Pellet a text message, stating her intention to hire a lawyer to resolve their situation. However, Pellet responded, suggesting they handle the matter without lawyers, as he believed it would be too expensive. Just hours after their text conversation, Pellet appeared to have a change of heart. He emailed Maria, expressing his profound sadness and inner turmoil. In the email, he conveyed his desire to have a genuine and calm conversation with Maria, free from argument. Maria replied, and they agreed to meet the following evening, around 5 p.m. on Monday, September 21st. Before meeting him, Maria was extremely nervous and messaged her friend Yasmin Martinez about the planned meeting. Unfortunately, the encounter ended in a terrifying way. The next day, September 22nd, 2020, Pellet frantically called 911, saying his wife might have taken prescription pills and was no longer breathing. Officer DEA Cruz arrived at Pellet's house around 1:40 a.m., with his body cam recording the entire scene. He found Pellet at the top of the stairs, near the main bedroom, where he was still wearing his green hospital scrubs and performing CPR on his wife. Their 2 sons were asleep in nearby rooms. Once the paramedics arrived, they took over CPR efforts on Maria. Officer asked Pellet about pills Maria took. Pellet fetched a bottle with clonazepam prescription from the bathroom, but it was in his name, not Maria's. The bottle was unusually back in the cabinet. Body cam footage showed Pellet pocketing the pill container. DEA Cruz suspected he concealed something. A needle catheter on the stairs and a medical bag with syringes outside a clinical setting raised more questions. Pellet informed the officers that Maria had been battling severe depression lately, which had taken a toll on her mental health. According to him, her desperation to deal with her overwhelming emotions led her to take the pills as a last resort. Despite efforts, Maria was pronounced dead at 3:58 a.m. Pellet was questioned, explaining he and Maria had a conversation, became intimate, and he took a shower. When he returned, Maria was unresponsive and not breathing. Officer notices Pellet's suspicious behavior, excessive sweating and evasive answers, contrasting with others. This raises suspicions, and Sergeant Lismata takes him in for questioning. Upon arrival, Pellet was left alone in the interrogation room for a period before an officer entered. Unbeknownst to Pellet, his actions were being recorded on video. When the officers reviewed the footage, they were shocked to see Pellet's sudden, extreme behavior. He began screaming, crying, hitting the walls, and throwing furniture around the room. His loud, out-of-control outburst caused a stir among people in the hallway and nearby rooms, who were frightened by the commotion coming from his room. Sergeant Louis Mata spoke with Pellet at 4 a.m. Pellet confessed to having an affair with Janet, whom he'd left the family home for 5 months prior. Maria knew about it. Pellet visited the family home, they talked and became intimate. He gave her clonazepam for anxiety and depression, but didn't know how much she took. He found her unresponsive 10 minutes later. After questioning, Maria's autopsy was performed just 8 hours after her death. This timely autopsy allowed for detection of any substances in her stomach contents. The results revealed a surprise: no pill fragments, but a small, red pinprick mark on her elbow, suggesting an injection. This finding shifted the investigation's focus. Maria's journal, found by investigators, revealed her anxiety and depression struggles. Her writings exposed her deep love for her husband and desire to save their family despite his infidelity. Entries disclosed her husband's abuse, her grief, and her longing to escape sadness. One plea read, "I don't want to be sad anymore. Bring me laughter, bring me peace, bring me happiness again." The day before Maria Muñoz's untimely death, she wrote in her journal, revealed her desire to live and move forward with her life. There was no hint of suicide or plans to end her life. As a result, after reviewing her journal, investigators initially ruled out suicide as a possibility. They needed more information to understand what had really happened. Sergeants Mata and Cruz received toxicology test results contradicting Pellet's claim about Maria having clonazepam. Instead, the tests revealed 7 surgical drugs in her system: morphine, Demerol, Versed, propofol, ketamine, Leanne, and Naren. Notably, propofol and ketamine are sedatives and pain management drugs, typically used intravenously during operations. The discovery of propofol in Maria's body was the most startling revelation for the investigators. Given his profession as a nurse anesthetist, they suspected that Pellet would have had access to the drug. Dr. Hunzinger, who had worked with Pellet and was familiar with propofol, was shocked by the unusually high amount found in Maria's system, the highest he had ever seen. This led the doctors to strongly suspect that propofol was the direct cause of Maria's death, as Pellet would have known the correct dosage to sedate someone or cause an overdose. Furthermore, a small mark on Maria's arm suggested that she may have been injected with a substance. The investigators believed they had sufficient evidence to arrest Pellet for his wife's murder, based on the toxicological report, his suspicious behavior, and Maria's journal. An arrest warrant was quickly obtained, and DEA crews promptly apprehended Pellet, who offered no resistance, almost as if he had anticipated his arrest. Pellet was then taken to the police station, marking the beginning of a new phase in the investigation as law enforcement officials prepared to question him further about the events surrounding Maria's tragic death. The trial began on March 21, 2023, with both the prosecution and defense presenting their arguments. The prosecution team, comprising only women and dubbed Maria's team, built a strong case against Pellet by using Maria Munoz's journal entries. This approach aimed to showcase Maria's personality to the jury, highlighting her qualities as a wife and mother. Through her journals, the prosecutors painted a picture of Maria as a caring, intelligent, and excellent mother, conveying her lively spirit to the jurors. During the trial, prosecutors suspected that Pellet drugged Maria by putting substances in her drink, making her sleepy. After she became unconscious, they believed he injected propofol into her arm. Prosecutors also thought Pellet deliberately delayed calling 911 so that responders would be unable to rescue Maria when they arrived. The journals helped prosecutors understand the challenges Maria faced, strengthening their resolve to seek justice in her case. Pellet's lawyer, Roberto Bali, argued that his client wanted to reconcile with wife Maria Munoz before her death, citing uncertain cause of death and insufficient evidence. Bali noted Pellet gave Maria a drug to reverse overdoses on the night she died, and both struggled with addiction, with no signs of force or coercion. After investigating Maria's social circles, friends, and family, it became clear that she was not a drug addict. It was evident that Pellet was the only person who could have provided her with the substantial quantity of propofol found in her system. Additionally, authorities convinced Pellet's girlfriend, Janet Avendano, a surgical nurse, to testify against him. She revealed that Pellet had confided in her, admitting that he gave Maria something to calm her down. Avendano also confirmed that Pellet had brought drugs, including propofol, home from work. The jury reached a verdict in under an hour, following a 9-day trial. On March 30, 2023, the jury found Pellet guilty of Maria's murder. He was subsequently sentenced to life in prison on April 27, 2023, plus an additional 10 years and a $10,000 fine for tampering with evidence. Joel Pellet is currently imprisoned for life at a Texas Department of Criminal Justice facility, serving time for his cruel actions. His imprisonment serves as a reminder that criminals will be held accountable and that Maria's memory will be honored through the pursuit of truth and justice. The reason behind Maria's murder is still unclear, but according to the prosecution, Joel Pellet killed his wife to end their marriage and start a new life with his girlfriend, Janet Avendano. In the end, justice prevailed, and the verdict ensured that Pellet was punished for his crime. The jury's decision brings some closure to this tragic case, sending a clear message that such brutal acts will not go unpunished. The conviction highlights the importance of upholding justice and serves as a warning to those who commit similar crimes that they will face the full force of the law. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Chris Watts. Shanann and Christopher Watts, both from North Carolina, met in 2012. Shanann was from Aberdeen, while Chris hailed from Spring Lake. On November 3, 2012, they got married, but not everyone was pleased with their union. Chris's parents, Cindy and Ronnie Watts, did not attend the wedding due to Cindy's dislike of Shanann and the way she treated her son. A year after their wedding, Shanann and Chris made a significant decision to buy a new home in Frederick, Colorado. This marked a new chapter in their lives as they started fresh in their new home. After relocating to Colorado, the couple looked forward to starting a family. Their dream was realized on December 17, 2013, with the birth of their daughter, Bella Marie. 2 years later, on July 17, 2015, they welcomed their second daughter, Celeste Catherine, affectionately known as Cece. Shanann was diagnosed with lupus at a young age, a chronic autoimmune disease that affects various parts of the body. The immune system mistakenly attacks healthy cells and tissues, producing autoantibodies that target and destroy them, leading to inflammation and tissue damage. This diagnosis brought devastating news. It would be challenging for her to conceive and have children. Shanann had always dreamed of becoming a mother, and this revelation shattered her. However, she defied the odds, experiencing the incredible joy of motherhood, not once, but twice. Shanann was a warm and compassionate person who radiated kindness and positivity. Those who knew her described her as a loving and caring individual who made everyone feel welcome. She had a driven personality, always striving to create a better life for herself and her family. Her vibrant and warm nature effortlessly drew people to her. Shanann was an exceptional mother to her two daughters, Bella and Cece. Her love for them was boundless, and she cherished being a mother more than anything in the world. She was dedicated to providing for her children in every way possible, nurturing and supporting them unconditionally. Bella, the older sibling, was a caring and nurturing child who enjoyed taking care of her younger sister. Cece, on the other hand, was a lively and energetic child who brought joy and laughter to everyone's lives with her vibrant personality. Shanann's friends and family thought she had a perfect marriage, but they found Chris hard to get close to. Despite this, they welcomed him because Shanann was deeply in love with him. In 2015, Shanann and Chris filed for bankruptcy due to significant financial struggles. These included a large mortgage, car payments, loans, medical bills, and a substantial amount of credit card debt. At the time, Chris worked at Anadarko Petroleum, and Shanann worked at a children's hospital call center. By 2016, Shanann had started a new career as a consultant for a multi-level marketing company. She sold a nutritional supplement called Thrive, which was administered through a patch. Shanann was extremely passionate about her job. According to a coworker, Cynthia DeRosette, everyone who met her was drawn to her energy. Shanann was happy with her life, husband, and two daughters, but she had one wish remaining: to have a baby boy to complete their family. In spring 2018, she got an unexpected but pleasant surprise when she found out she was pregnant for the third time. This news filled her with excitement and anticipation. After further tests, Shanann discovered she was having a baby boy. Shanann and Chris were overjoyed, and they chose to name their baby Nico. When Bella and Cece, Shannon's daughters, heard they were going to be big sisters, they were thrilled. During the summer of 2018, Shanann, who was pregnant with Nico at the time, visited her family in North Carolina, while Chris remained in Colorado for work. Shanann took her daughters, Bella and Cece, to visit Chris's parents, Cindy and Ronnie. Despite her strained relationship with her in-laws, Shanann wanted her daughters to spend time with their grandparents. When they arrived, Cindy prepared a snack for Cece despite knowing about her peanut allergy, which Shanann had warned her about. Cindy still served Cece a snack containing peanuts, which deeply upset Shanann. She felt that Cindy had recklessly endangered Cece's life. While visiting family in North Carolina, Shanann noticed a strange change in Chris's communication with her. He stopped responding to her messages and calls, leaving her confused and puzzled. When she asked him what was going on, Chris explained that he had taken on more responsibilities at work due to new employees, but assured her it was nothing to worry about. On July 31st, Chris flew from Colorado to North Carolina to spend the week with Shanann and their two daughters, Bella and Cece. The girls were thrilled to see their dad, and as Chris stepped off the plane, they rushed to him, beaming with excitement. Chris hugged them tightly, but his greeting to Shanann was different. Instead of a kiss, he simply nodded at her. Shanann felt deeply hurt by Chris's distant behavior and was unable to hide her emotions. She texted a friend, confessing her growing concern and sadness. She felt like Chris had changed somehow, and she barely recognized the man she had married. Her words were filled with a mix of sorrow and confusion. Shanann texted her friend to say that her husband Chris was refusing to talk to her, even though they were in the same room. Instead of speaking directly, they were communicating through their phones. Shannon shared a photo with her friend that showed her and Chris sitting on separate couches facing away from each other. In her texts, Shannon confided in her friend that she suspected Chris might be interested in someone else. Her friend was shocked and insisted that Chris would never do that, given how much he loved Shannon. In a heartfelt message to her friend, Shannon revealed that Chris had confessed to her that he no longer thought they were compatible. This revelation left Shannon stunned, as she had always believed their love was strong. Chris had made things even more difficult for Shannon by admitting that he had hoped getting her pregnant would change his feelings for her. But unfortunately, this didn't happen. Shannon was devastated to hear this, as she valued their relationship and believed their love was strong enough to overcome any obstacles. Determined to rescue her family, Shannon proposed that she and Chris attend couples therapy together, aware that their relationship was struggling and hoping that a professional could help them get through their problems. However, Chris refused point blank. Shannon was prepared to make sacrifices and do everything possible to save their relationship, but she quickly came to realize that Chris was unwilling to meet her halfway. Despite her best attempts, Shannon understood that there was nothing Chris was willing to compromise on, and this made her efforts futile. After returning home to Colorado from a trip to North Carolina, Shannon, Chris, and their daughters settled back into their normal routine. However, Shannon's stay was short-lived as she soon embarked on another trip to Arizona for business. During her time in Arizona, Shannon's friends noticed a change in her behavior. Instead of being her usual cheerful self, she seemed confused, upset, and distressed. One evening in their hotel room, Shannon confided in her friends about her concerns. On August 11th, while Shannon was with her friends in Arizona, she received a notification on her phone showing a charge on her and Chris's account from a restaurant. Although this wasn't unusual, the amount of the bill raised concerns. Shannon wondered why it was so high and suspected that Chris might be dining with another woman. This suspicion left her feeling uneasy and uncertain. Shannon returned home from her business trip around 1:48 a.m. on August 13th. Her friend Nicole Atkinson drove her home. The doorbell camera footage showed Shannon entering her house at that time. Shannon's friends were worried when she failed to send her usual good morning messages. They knew she had a crucial appointment at the OBGYN at 9:30 a.m., which she would never miss. However, when she also missed a 12:30 p.m. business meeting, her close friend Nicole Atkinson became extremely concerned. Nicole was convinced something was amiss when no one had heard from Shannon all day. She couldn't shake off the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Feeling a growing sense of urgency, Nicole decided to drive to Shannon's house. As she approached the house, her anxiety spiked. Shannon's van was parked in the garage and her daily shoes were by the front door. Nicole knocked on the front door, hoping Shannon would come out and explain that she had overslept and was tired from her previous day's flight. But Shannon didn't respond. Chris was contacted by one of Shannon's friends who were unable to reach her. He told them not to worry, saying she might be at a friend's house with their daughters. However, this confused Shannon's friends, since they were all in touch with each other and none knew where she was. Shannon didn't have plans to meet any of them. When her friends threatened to report Shannon and the girls missing to the Frederick Police Department, Chris didn't want to involve the police. Despite this, Nicole, worried about her friend, called 911 to report Shannon, Bella, and Cece missing. After Nicole contacted the police, an officer from the Frederick Police Department responded to Shannon and Chris's residence. The officer's body camera footage showed Nicole was visibly distraught over her missing friend. As Nicole was providing every detail she knew about Shannon and her daughters, Chris arrived at the house. Chris exited his vehicle and approached the officer, but it was apparent he didn't share Nicole's level of concern, despite his wife and daughters being missing. During the search of Shannon and Chris's house, the officer found Shannon's purse. Inside, the officer discovered medication prescribed to Shannon and her 2 daughters. This discovery further alarmed Nicole, but Chris remained calm. The officer also located Shannon's wedding band on the bedside table. The officer and Chris visited a neighbor to review footage from their security camera, which captured part of Shannon and Chris's driveway and garage. The footage showed Chris opening the garage door, moving around, and leaving the home at 5:28 a.m. As they watched the TV footage, Chris's demeanor began to shift. He grew nervous and fidgety, seemingly uncomfortable with what he was seeing on screen. Even his neighbor noticed Chris's strange behavior. When Chris left the house, the neighbor discreetly confided in the officer, expressing doubts about Chris's behavior, stating that he didn't think Chris was acting normally. Concerned about Shannon's well-being, her friends wanted to launch a search for Bella and Cece immediately. However, Chris vetoed the idea, warning them against joining the search. His lack of concern for his wife and daughters deeply troubled Shannon's friends, who couldn't understand his apathy. Officers went door to door in Shannon and Chris's neighborhood, asking residents if they had seen Shannon or noticed anything unusual. The next day, the FBI and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation joined the search for Shannon, Bella, and Cece. The Boulder Police Department also provided cadaver dogs to search the property and house. As officers searched the home, a handler commented that the house smelled of cleaning solutions and looked unusually clean, which raised suspicions. The presence of cleaning solutions suggested that someone might be trying to conceal evidence or clean up potential clues. Chris gave an interview outside his home while it was being searched, saying he and Shannon had an emotional conversation before she left, but no argument. He made a heartfelt plea for their return, but came across as aloof and unemotional, sparking suspicion. On August 14th, Special Agent Coder conducted an interview with Chris. During this interview, Chris shared his theory that Shannon might have taken the girls to a friend's house to relax and unwind given the situation. Meanwhile, the police station was flooded with tips about potential sightings of Shannon and the girls, including various photographs. However, when asked to identify any of the individuals in the photos as his missing wife and daughters, Chris was unable to do so. Agent Coder also inquired about Chris and Shannon's marriage. Chris asserted that he had never been unfaithful to Shannon, and, to the best of his knowledge, Shannon had never been unfaithful to him either. He explained that they were the kind of couple who would confide in each other if they ever felt the urge to stray. Throughout the interview, Agent Coder observed Chris's unusual behavior, specifically his frequent hand movements towards his neck. This caught Agent Coder's attention and sparked his suspicion, leading him to wonder if these movements might be indicative of something more significant. During the interview, Agent Coder stepped out briefly to share his suspicion with the other officers that Chris might have strangled Shannon. As more time passed without any sign of Shannon or her daughters, worry and despair deepened among their loved ones. Despite their growing doubts about Shannon's safety, they clung to the hope that Bella and Cece might still be alive. Chris was released from the police department after 3 hours of questioning. However, the authorities asked him to return the next day, August 15th, for a polygraph test, and he agreed. On August 15th, Chris picked up his father from the airport and drove to the Frederick Police Department. Tammy Lee from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation administered the polygraph test. During the test, Chris denied knowing Shannon's whereabouts and claimed he had no role in her disappearance. He didn't pass the test, leaving detectives convinced of his involvement in the disappearance and deaths of his wife and daughters. However, they still needed to persuade him to confess. The special agent, Tammy Lee, a highly skilled coder and polygraph expert, confronted Chris about his failed polygraph test results. Chris admitted that he had not physically harmed Shannon, but acknowledged that he had caused her emotional suffering. Additionally, he confessed to having an affair with a coworker named Nicole Kessinger. Chris expressed remorse for his infidelity, stating that he had never intended to engage in such behavior. However, he denied any involvement in the disappearance of his family. During the interview, Chris asked to speak with his father, Ronnie. The officers were initially hesitant, worried that allowing Ronnie into the room would prompt Chris to request legal representation. Despite their reservations, they allowed it, hoping Ronnie's presence might persuade Chris to confess. In the interrogation room, Chris confessed to killing Shannon, claiming he did it because she had supposedly harmed their daughters, Bella and Cece. However, Shannon's friends were certain Chris was lying, knowing that Shannon would never hurt her children, whom she loved deeply and was eager to welcome her new son, Nico. Chris admitted to burying Shannon's body in a shallow grave at one of his work sites and disposing of his daughters' bodies in oil tanks. Despite being arrested and taken into custody, he persisted in denying any harm to them. The detectives didn't believe for a second that Shannon had harmed her daughters. Chris pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. At the sentencing hearing, the judge made a bold statement about the heinous crime Chris had committed, calling it the most inhumane and vicious one he had encountered in his career, despite having dealt with thousands of cases. Years later, Chris confessed to murdering his wife Shannon in their bed. He had strangled her after she confronted him about his extramarital affair and threatened to take their daughters away. He then put her body in his truck and drove to his work site with their two daughters. There, Chris claimed to have killed his daughters, one by one, in a horrific sequence of events, where one daughter was forced to witness her sister's death before meeting the same fate. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Sierra Jugan. Sierra Jugan was a young woman who captivated everyone with her joyful personality. Her happy and humorous nature made her the center of attention wherever she went. She had a lively, cheeky personality that brought immense happiness to those around her. Even when she made mistakes, she had a special way of making her mom smile. As Sierra entered high school, she continued to showcase her adventurous spirit. She boldly took on new experiences, including playing volleyball. Whether on or off the court, she displayed a remarkable level of comfort and confidence. On July 19, 2016, the Jen family returned from their vacation and began unpacking. Sierra was looking forward to the fall semester at the University of Tu, where she planned to study abroad. Her mom wanted to discuss her plans with her, but Sierra, being an athletic person, was eager to try out her new bike. So whenever she had the time, she was keen to take a ride. Before leaving the house, Sierra told her mom that she was heading to her boyfriend Josh's house. Her mom acknowledged her plans and told her she would see her later, around 1:05 p.m. Sierra looked cute, with her hair tied up in a ponytail, wearing shorts and a tank top as she set out on her ride. Josh, Sierra's boyfriend, called her home phone because he was worried about her whereabouts. He had tried calling her phone several times, but it kept going straight to voicemail. When Josh asked Sierra's mom if she was home, she said no. Josh told Sierra's mom that Sierra had left his house around 7 p.m., and he hadn't seen or heard from her since then. Sierra's mom knew something was wrong because Sierra always answered her phone. Her first thought was to call Sierra's grandparents who lived nearby, but they said Sierra wasn't with them. Sierra's family and Josh started searching for her, worried about her safety. Sierra's mom quickly got in her car and started driving around, looking carefully at every possible place Sierra could be, including the sides of the road. Sierra's aunt, uncle, and cousin also joined the search, thinking Sierra might have been in an accident and got hit by a car. As time went by, worry grew. The possibility of Sierra being hurt, maybe with a broken leg, weighed heavily on their minds. Despite their relentless efforts and exhaustive search, they couldn't find any trace of Sierra. When Sierra's mom got home, she immediately took to social media, reaching out to Sierra's friends, desperately hoping someone had seen or heard from her. But to her dismay, there was complete silence. Hours passed, and still, there was no sign of Sierra. Filled with worry, Sierra's mom knew every minute counted and decided to call the police. Just an hour later, a concerned neighbor called Sierra's family saying County Road 6 was blocked off. With their hearts racing, Sierra's family rushed out to see what was happening. They were met by a chaotic scene surrounded by officers who refused to let them through. The officers stayed tight-lipped about Sierra, leaving her mom in a state of panic. She couldn't help but wonder if the police had found her missing daughter. The small-town police officers, seeking answers, decided to seek the FBI's assistance. They promised to deliver any information they could to Sierra's family as soon as possible. Understandably, the family found themselves unable to sleep, remaining wide awake and contemplating their next course of action. The following day, Sierra's mom and aunt took matters into their own hands, refusing to wait for answers. Her mom made a series of calls to hospitals, desperately searching for any signs of an unidentified female patient that might be Sierra. Despite call after call, they turned up nothing, leaving them feeling increasingly hopeless. A lead emerged from Detroit, Michigan, offering a glimmer of hope in the search for Sierra. A young woman, bearing a striking resemblance to her, had been admitted to a hospital with severe injuries, including numerous broken bones, after escaping from a moving vehicle with no identification. In an effort to confirm her identity, a nurse asked Sierra's family to describe any distinguishing marks on her body. Sierra's mom recalled a scar on her calf and a pierced belly button, which seemed to match the hospitalized girl's features, raising the family's hopes that they had finally found Sierra. Unfortunately, their hopes were soon dashed when they discovered that the girl in the hospital was not Sierra, leaving the family devastated and heartbroken after investing so much hope and anticipation in the possibility. Later that morning, the police visited Sierra's house to brief them on the previous night's events. One of the officers had found a trampled cornfield near where he'd parked his car and approached the area. He noticed signs of a struggle and a motorcycle track inside the cornfield. Not wanting to disturb any potential evidence, he backed away without touching anything. As he retreated, he caught a glimpse of a reflection: Sierra's purple bike. Further investigation uncovered several items at the scene: a pair of men's sunglasses, a pair of women's sunglasses, a blood-stained sock, and a screwdriver. Based on these discoveries, the police concluded that Sierra was likely abducted from that location. During the investigation, detectives thoroughly questioned Sierra's friends and family to gather information about her boyfriend Josh. They learned that Sierra and Josh had been inseparable since they were 7 years old, and their friendship developed into a romantic relationship in their first year of high school. The couple was known for their energetic and carefree nature, sharing a passion for skiing, among other things. After high school, Sierra went to the University of Toledo, while Josh enrolled at Bowling Green, but despite the physical distance, their commitment to each other remained strong. They often talked about getting married in the future, although Sierra emphasized her priority on completing her education before settling down, showcasing her academic dedication. Detectives investigating the case found that Sierra had visited Josh's house in the early afternoon on July 19th. According to the gathered information, Sierra decided to leave Josh's house and head home around 6:30 p.m. Because he was worried about her safety, Josh joined Sierra on her ride home, riding alongside her on his motorcycle. After a few miles, Sierra told Josh to turn back and go home, wanting to ride her bike alone and prove her independence. Josh reluctantly agreed, and they parted ways, with Josh heading back on his motorcycle and Sierra continuing her ride. During the investigation, detectives discovered motorcycle tracks in the nearby corn stalks, not far from Sierra's bike. This raised the question of whether these tracks belonged to Josh's motorcycle, and detectives couldn't ignore the possible connection. They began a thorough investigation to determine if there was any evidence linking Josh to the scene where Sierra went missing. As a result, detectives set up a command post to gather all relevant clues about Sierra's disappearance. A promising lead emerged quickly. A local resident came forward, saying that on July 14th, while driving, he saw a motorcycle helmet on the side of the road. He asked his son to retrieve it and put it in their truck. Later, after learning about Sierra's disappearance, he examined the helmet more closely and found red stains, which he suspected were blood. The helmet was discovered near the cornfield where Sierra's bike was found. The detectives asked Josh about his helmet, and to their relief, he produced it, confirming he had it with him. Furthermore, they verified that Josh had returned home after the interview with his parents, ruling him out as a suspect due to his solid alibi. Despite being visibly shaken, Josh was not suspected by Sierra's family in connection with her disappearance. The detectives focused on identifying the owner of a blood-stained motorcycle helmet found on the roadside. Recognizing the significance of DNA evidence, they sent the helmet to the crime lab for testing, awaiting the results with anticipation, hoping for a breakthrough in their investigation. Community unites in search for Sierra, organizing parties to scour every area for clues. Townspeople work together, fueled by a deep sense of unity, to bring her home safely. Hundreds gather at a candlelight vigil, sending thoughts and prayers for her return. 2 days after Sierra vanished, the police got a tip about a suspicious van speeding through the area where she was last seen. People thought she might have been kidnapped and forced into sex trafficking. The tipster gave the police the van's license plate number. The police interviewed the van's owner, but it turned out the van had nothing to do with Sierra's disappearance. The owner explained that he sped up because another car suddenly appeared from behind, which might have been a family member looking for Sierra, and he panicked. By the 48-hour mark, the investigation had turned up no leads on Sierra's whereabouts. As time goes on, her family is struggling to stay hopeful. With each passing day, the chances of finding her alive get smaller and smaller. Despite trying to stay positive, the harsh reality of the situation is getting harder to ignore. The police went from door to door searching for Sierra, and their investigation eventually took them to a farm near where her bike was found. The farm, which covered an acre of land, had several buildings including a small house, a trailer, and a large barn. The owner of the property was James Worley. When the police arrived at the farm, they started talking to James Worley. They asked him about the day Sierra went missing, hoping he could tell them something about her disappearance. But what James said shocked them. He told them he had been out riding his motorcycle that day, but it broke down, and he lost some things along the way, including a screwdriver and his helmet. This was surprising because those were the same items found at the scene where Sierra was taken. By saying this, James had unintentionally put himself at the scene of the crime, which made the detectives very suspicious of him and his connection to Sierra's disappearance. The police were determined to delve deeper into their investigation, and they questioned James Worley. During the questioning, they noticed something that caught their attention: scratches on his face. It was clear that he had been involved in a struggle, and this discovery only increased their suspicions about him, raising more questions. The detectives wondered if these scratches were the result of a confrontation with the missing girl, Sierra. After questioning James Worley about Sierra's disappearance, the detectives returned to the police station. They decided to conduct a background check on him, hoping to uncover relevant information as they looked into his past. But what they discovered sent chills down their spines. James Worley had a dark criminal history, including a previous attempt to abduct a young woman 26 years earlier on July 4, 1989. The woman's name was Robin Garter. On July 4, 1989, 26-year-old Robin Garter was getting ready to attend a neighborhood picnic. While her mother was busy preparing potato salad and making final arrangements for the event, Robin decided to squeeze in a bike ride beforehand. However, she had forgotten to bring water and was now struggling with the intense heat. As she considered turning back home to quench her thirst, Robin heard the sound of a car approaching from behind. Robin thought that after the vehicle passed her, she would head back home. But before she could react, the car crashed into her bike, sending her flying into a nearby ditch. She was stunned and disoriented. The driver stopped and got out, looking concerned and trying to figure out what had happened. But then things took a dark turn. The person who had hit her suddenly revealed sinister intentions. Without warning, he hit her hard on the back of the head. As she struggled to understand what was happening, the attacker held a screwdriver to her throat, threatening to kill her in a menacing tone. He ordered her to get up and get into his car right away. The man forced Robin into his car at screwdriver point, trying to handcuff her once she was inside. He managed to cuff one wrist, but Robin fought back fiercely, preventing him from cuffing the other. She screamed for help at the top of her lungs, but her cries were drowned out by the empty cornfields, with no one around to hear her. Robin's fierce resistance against her attacker left her on the brink of unconsciousness multiple times, but she refused to give up. Just as the silence was becoming unsettling, she picked up the faint sound of a motorcycle in the distance. As she strained her eyes, she saw it approaching the car where her captor was. Realizing this might be her only chance to escape, Robin waved her arms wildly to get the rider's attention. Luckily, the rider noticed her distress signals and brought the motorcycle to a stop. In a desperate bid for help, Robin explained that the man was trying to kill her. Without hesitation, she seized the opportunity and quickly climbed onto the back of the motorcycle, leaving her captor and the car behind. The motorcycle rider drove Robin home, where she collapsed. Robin's mother called the police and an ambulance, and Robin was rushed to the hospital for medical treatment. The motorcyclist, determined to help the authorities, led the police back to the scene of the incident. To their surprise, they found James Worley still present, waiting with his car. When questioned, James was fully cooperative and provided identification to prove who he was. However, his version of events differed significantly from initial assumptions. James strongly denied any intention of kidnapping Robin. According to his account, Robin was riding her bike erratically, swerving into the road, making it impossible for him to avoid hitting her. James claimed that after the accident, Robin became hysterical, and he restrained her with handcuffs not to harm her, but to secure her to the steering wheel of his truck while he sought help. He insisted his actions were driven by genuine concern for Robin's well-being. James Worley was arrested in 1989 for trying to abduct Robin. He was found guilty of abduction and sentenced to 6 to 10 years in the state prison in Mansfield, Ohio. Due to good behavior, he was released 3 years later. When Robin found out that James was released, she was terrified. The fear of James potentially striking again weighed heavily on her mind. With information about James Worley's criminal history in hand, the police obtained a search warrant and went to his home. When they arrived, they started searching the house, which James shared with his mother. At first, everything seemed normal. Next, they turned their attention to the large backyard, methodically searching the outdoor area. The officers then discovered a barn located in the corner of the yard, which sparked their curiosity. They approached the structure cautiously. Inside the barn, the police found stacks of hay bales. They searched the barn carefully, looking for any evidence that might connect James to Cece's disappearance. The detectives examined every nook and cranny, checking each bale of hay for hidden items or clues. As they removed the bales of hay from James Worley's barn, the detectives noticed a small green crate in the corner. They approached it cautiously and opened it, finding bags of underwear, stockings, and tube tops. Each item was neatly labeled and sealed in a plastic Ziploc bag. As the detectives searched through the items, they were shocked to see a pair of purple panties with what looked like bloodstains. This discovery filled them with a sense of dread, and they wondered what other disturbing things they might find in their search of James Worley's barn. The detectives quickly spotted a piece of plywood on the ground and recognized its potential importance. They carefully lifted the plywood, exposing a small freezer buried in the barn. When they opened the freezer, they were met with a strong, unpleasant smell, similar to bleach, which heightened their suspicions. As they continued their investigation, they found other disturbing objects hidden behind hay bales, including a stained air mattress that hinted at a dark history. The presence of zip ties, duct tape, handcuffs, and keys added to their concerns, as these items are commonly used in abductions and other criminal activities. The detectives decided to send all the items taken from the property for DNA testing. Worley attempted to explain the items as part of a porn business he claimed to be planning, but the evidence against him was too strong to ignore. The combination of the disturbing discoveries at the crime scene and the incriminating items led to James's arrest for Sierra's murder. Sierra's family was stunned to learn that her abductor was someone who lived far away from her home. This news sparked a million questions in her mind, with the most pressing one being where she was. The detectives launched a thorough investigation of James's property, meticulously searching every inch of it and leaving no stone unturned. They brought in cadaver dogs to help detect any potential remains. The detectives focused on a pond on the property, recognizing its potential significance. They carefully drained it to uncover any evidence hidden beneath the water's surface. They also inspected the insulation in the front of the attic. As the investigation progressed, they extended their search to the neighboring properties, considering the possibility that evidence might have been dispersed beyond James's property. They pursued leads in all directions, diligence and thoroughness guiding their efforts. A farmer was walking through his vast field when he received a call. As he walked, he noticed a peculiar area of corn that was matted down and decided to take a closer look. When he approached the spot, he saw a nearby mound of dirt, which immediately made him think it could be a grave. This worried him even more because of the recent search for Sierra. With this on his mind, he quickly called the police, telling them about his suspicions and giving them the exact location. Responding promptly to the farmer's distress call, the police arrived at the scene. They noticed a fresh pile of dirt, which fueled their suspicion that it could be a grave. Taking the situation seriously, they began processing the area carefully to avoid disturbing any potential evidence. The officers examined every inch of the scene, hoping to find clues about Sierra's whereabouts. However, despite their thorough efforts, their search yielded no results. The detectives then searched the adjoining farms for Sierra, using drones and helicopters to cover a larger area and increase their chances of locating her. During their search, they found another mound of dirt with freshly matted corn. Their trained dogs detected the scent of decomposition, suggesting a potential crime scene. As the crime scene investigators dug, they made a grim discovery. They found human remains. Based on the evidence, it was believed to be Sierra's body. Tragically, her hands were bound behind her back, and her feet were tied to the handcuffs. Further examination revealed that an object was lodged in her mouth, restricting her airway, which ultimately led to her death. Later that night, the Sierra family received a devastating call they had been fearing. The police had found Sierra's lifeless body. The news was met with an overwhelming outpouring of grief as the entire family broke down in tears. The sorrow felt by each family member was palpable, and the weight of the moment was crushing. A month after Sierra's tragic abduction and murder, James Worley was charged with 19 counts, including kidnapping and aggravated murder. 2 years later, Worley's trial began. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, he pleaded not guilty to all charges. Over 8 intense days, the prosecution presented a gripping story that captivated the jury and spectators alike. After deliberating for 6 hours, the jury found Worley guilty on all counts related to Sierra's murder. The severity of the crime led to Worley being sentenced to death. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Cargen Oviedo. Rolando Angel Aquino was a charismatic individual who naturally drew people's attention. One day he caught the captivating gaze of Carmen Oviedo, a woman with a fiery passion for life and an infectious energy. They instantly connected, sharing similar interests and dreams, as well as a strong determination and entrepreneurial drive. This chance encounter led to a beautiful relationship that brought them true happiness. In 2016, the couple took the next step, moving in together and launching their own business, a warehouse, in their home. Carmen's keen eye for detail shone as she created a welcoming sign on one of the windows for customer service, alongside lists of items for sale. This was their pride and joy, a small but thriving venture. The people of Mañata watched this happy and driven couple with admiration and curiosity, wondering who they were and how they achieved so much. While many knew Carmen from her childhood, Rolando remained an enigma, with his past in Bolivia remaining a mystery to all. Rolando not only co-ran the business with Carmen, but he also worked at the Galeen Fair, where wholesale fruit sales took place. From the outside, it seemed like they had found their perfect life together, but even the strongest relationships can be put to the test. One day, Rolando was shocked to find Carmen in the car with another man. His initial reaction was anger, and in that moment, he almost destroyed the car's interior. Their picture-perfect relationship crumbled in a matter of minutes. However, Rolando decided to forgive and continue their relationship, choosing to move forward with the one he loved. To outsiders, they still appeared to be the ideal couple, capable of overcoming any obstacle together. Rolando Angel Aquino, born in 1987 in Bolivia, is an enigmatic figure. The exact date of his arrival in Argentina remains unknown, like many other aspects of his life. As the eldest of 7 children, Rolando learned the importance of family bonds and hard work from a young age. He dreamed of a happy family filled with joy and laughter. In his youth, he met Carolina Chavez, with whom he had a son. Despite their difficulties, the couple remained on good terms. Later in life, Rolando had a second son, Elias, with Soledad Guardio. Although his relationships with Soledad didn't work out, Rolando remained a devoted and caring father to his children. He maintained a warm relationship with the mothers of his children and stayed in touch with them. Rolando was a physically fit man who prioritized his health from a young age. He played sports and soccer for the local team to stay active. His colleagues and loved ones described him as kind, hardworking, and sociable. Although he got along well with his neighbors, Rolando had a unique charm when it came to socializing. Carmen was born on March 30, 1990, and grew up in Monado, where she and Rolando later set up their warehouse. The locals knew her as an outgoing and open-minded woman. Like Rolando, Carmen longed for a happy and successful family life with a loving and devoted partner. However, it took her some time to find the right person to build her happiness with. Carmen had 2 daughters from previous relationships before meeting Rolando. One of her former partners, Rule O.A., was the father of one of the girls, and she married him in 2013. However, their marriage was troubled and eventually headed for a breakdown. Rule claimed that financial struggles were one of the main reasons for their conflicts. Feeling anxious about his life and seeking better opportunities, Rule left his family under the pretense of buying something essential, fleeing the city and moving abroad to avoid being traced. By the summer of 2019, 9-year-old Elias was living with Rolando and Carmen. They had made plans to spend quality time together in the coming months. However, on the morning of July 12, 2019, Rolando found Elias unwell when he went to wish him good morning before leaving for work. Concerned, Rolando took Elias to the children's hospital to see a pediatrician. After an examination, the doctors determined that Elias's condition was critical, and he was rushed to the intensive care unit. Despite the best efforts of the medical staff, Elias tragically passed away shortly after arriving at the hospital. The remarkable thing about Elias's death was that he had been in perfect health when he left home, showing no unusual symptoms, and seemed equally well when he arrived at his father's house. However, the medical report was shocking. It revealed that Elias had died from severe poisoning, which caused his organs to fail and a blood clot in his brain. This news left Elias's parents stunned, as they could not understand how their active and healthy son could have suddenly died from such a mysterious illness. As part of their professional duty, the doctors recommended further forensic investigation. However, Elias's mother and grandmother were too grief-stricken to consider this, and they refused. The funeral home Karjan suggested cremating the body, but Elias's mother declined, preferring to bury her son in a private cemetery where she could visit his grave and lay flowers. Elias's sudden death shattered Rolando's heart, leaving him devastated by the loss of his youngest son. Karjan, who was caring and loving, stood by him every step of the way, never leaving his side. She took charge of all their business affairs, providing him with gentle support and helping him navigate his pain and grief. As time passed, the warmth and love from the woman he cherished gradually eased his suffering. 16 months after the tragedy, Rolando took a major step and proposed to Karjan, and they got married, with Rolando convinced she'd always be by his side. However, their happiness was short-lived. On February 6, 2022, Karjan returned home from a beauty salon and gym visit, and the next day, February 7th, she noticed Rolando was experiencing serious health issues. A medical ambulance was called to their home as Rolando, 35, suddenly felt very ill after vomiting profusely and collapsed in their living room. The housekeeper called for emergency medical help. At the Santa Maria clinic, doctors allowed Karjan to see her husband, but his condition was critical. Despite the medical staff's efforts, Rolando passed away on February 9th. The cause of death was severe poisoning, which raised questions among the medical staff, given Rolando was a healthy and active sportsman. Rolando's wife, Karjan, revealed that he was taking medication to treat dark skin spots. However, this information raised red flags among specialists. Upon further investigation, tests disclosed an abnormal amount of calcium oxalate crystals in Rolando's system, a telling sign of ethylene glycol poisoning, a key ingredient in car antifreeze. The sudden and mysterious death of Rolando sparked a high-priority investigation by the authorities. The prosecutor's office launched a thorough inquiry into the neighborhood where the Aquino couple resided. Neighbors became crucial witnesses, reporting that Karjan had frequently administered her husband unknown medication. They knew she used these drugs to attend a party without her husband. Nevertheless, neighbors also expressed concerns about Rolando's son, leading investigators to consider the possibility that Karjan intended to sedate her husband temporarily rather than kill him. The Technology Crimes Unit officers' findings completely dismissed the idea that Rolando's death was accidental. They requested forensic examinations and questioned Karjan, Rolando's wife, thoroughly. However, during the interrogation, Karjan's responses were contradictory. The officers asked her to identify the substance she had given her husband before he died, and she claimed it was a skin blemish remedy that she had administered through an IV. When they asked her to produce a vial of the solution, Karjan said the housekeeper, Claudia Cortez, had already thrown it away. But when the officers interviewed Claudia, she denied Karjan's statement about the discarded vial. Claudia also revealed that she had overheard a conversation between the couple in which Rolando expressed dissatisfaction with his medication. Karjan was detained, and her cell phone was seized as part of the investigation. The news of Rolando's death shocked his family, friends, and teammates. Those who regularly visited the Aquino couple's warehouse and other locals were also stunned. Everyone struggled to understand what had happened and why the family's father had died so suddenly. Rolando's ex-husband was shocked when rumors started circulating that Karjan had deliberately poisoned him. The ex-husband described Karjan as always being affectionate and never violent towards him. However, an investigation into Karjan's phone revealed that she had searched online for information on the most deadly poisons and ways to erase her search history. Furthermore, records showed that she had ordered ethylene glycol twice from an online store. According to the Agency for Toxic Substances and the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, ethylene glycol is a synthetic substance used in antifreeze production, which is odorless, has a sweet taste, and is extremely toxic to humans. Based on forensic evidence and other clues, the prosecutor's office accused Karjan of intentionally poisoning Rolando by mixing the substance with orange juice, which severely damaged his health and ultimately led to his death. A series of strange and tragic events in the Aquino family prompted the authorities to take drastic action. Suspicions arose over the cause of 9-year-old Elias's death, leading to a new investigation. The prosecutor's office launched a detailed probe into the boy's medical history. According to his mother, Elias was healthy and active until he suddenly slipped into a coma at his father's house, never to recover. However, the death certificate stated that the cause was a malfunction of his internal systems and cerebral thrombosis. Investigators doubted that a healthy 9-year-old could have died from such causes. The prosecutor's office requested information on possible ethylene glycol purchases and received a response confirming that Karjan had bought the poison on July 2, 2019, shortly before Elias arrived at the Aquino home. Relatives also confirmed that Karjan insisted on cremating Elias's body, but the birth mother refused, preferring to bury her son. The gathered evidence was sufficient for prosecutor Claudia Rios to file new aggravated murder charges against Karjan on March 4th, related to Elias's poisoning. On March 14th, a judge ordered Karjan's pretrial detention, which she tried to appeal, but the judge rejected, ruling that she should remain in custody until the trial began. The highly anticipated trial commenced on November 28, 2022, at the Mendoza Criminal Court, drawing widespread public and media interest. 2 pending indictments were being addressed, one led by prosecutor Fernando Guzzo, focusing on the murder of Elias, and the other involving Claudia Rios, related to the murder of Rolando. Karjan's defense team sought to counter the charges, claiming that Rolando had a history of violence and abuse, and that there was insufficient reliable evidence to support the allegations. They emphasized that Karjan lacked a motive for the murders, pointing out that she was the sole owner of the house, cars, and business. The defense also argued that the charges against Karjan were unfounded and suggested that her partner might have purchased antifreeze by hacking into her account. Additionally, Karjan claimed to have an alibi for February 6th, the day her husband was poisoned, as she was not at home when he began experiencing health problems. After the initial phase of the trial, the defendant, dubbed the Gumalan poisoner by the media, was given the opportunity to speak. Emotionally, Karjan denied committing the heinous crime, stating that it was extremely distressing for her to be accused of something she did not do, especially considering she was a mother to 2 young daughters. The court hearing continued, with a focus on witness testimony that brought new aspects of the case to light. The prosecution questioned Karjan, targeting key points. Specifically, they asked her if she had suggested cremating her son Rolando. Karjan responded firmly that the decision wasn't hers to make, and she never made such a suggestion. Next, the prosecution called relatives of the deceased to testify, providing more details about what happened. Soledad Elias's mother took the stand, telling the court that after her son's death, Rolando told her that Karjan had suggested cremating Elias's body so that both families could keep the boy's ashes. However, Soledad rejected the idea. She also shared her memories of meeting Rolando at the cemetery, where he mentioned Karjan's jealousy. According to her, Karjan and Rolando's relationship was troubled to the point where they even slept in separate beds. Carolina, the mother of Rolando's first child, was another witness. She stated that her ex-husband Rolando and Karjan slept in separate rooms, although she had never interacted with Karjan before the incident. However, on the morning of February 8th, Karjan called Carolina to inform her that Rolando was ill and hospitalized. Karjan claimed that Rolando had probably taken some medication and was feeling unwell, and asked Carolina to help her unlock Rolando's cell phone, suspecting that he was seeing another woman. Carolina was shocked to hear about Rolando's condition, as they had met just a few days prior and he seemed fine. When she arrived at the hospital, Karjan was already there, talking to the doctors. Carolina was not allowed to enter, so she waited outside. As she was leaving, Karjan told her that everyone else had left, which made Carolina suspicious. She demanded an explanation from the doctors, who told her that Rolando had lost consciousness and was not responding to treatment. Carolina then complained to the hospital secretary and later spoke to Karjan, who claimed that Rolando had taken medication for skin blemishes, which caused an allergic reaction. According to Karjan, the medication bottle was no longer available because the housekeeper had thrown it away. The accumulation of these details only served to deepen the mystery surrounding this complex case. As the trial progressed, medical professionals and experts took the stand to present crucial forensic evidence, as well as the findings of a comprehensive psychological examination. This new evidence shed light on previously overlooked details that had gone unnoticed until then. Dr. Ivana Marinelli, a pediatrician at the hospital, recalled Elias's hospitalization in July 2019. At the time, Elias was rushed to the hospital with severe breathing problems and required immediate intubation. A CT scan revealed a severe blood clot in his brain. Elias received intensive care, and Dr. Marinelli confirmed that his symptoms matched those of ethylene glycol poisoning. These symptoms included impaired consciousness, restlessness, and eventually a coma, accompanied by a blood clotting disorder. Despite the medical team's best efforts, Elias's condition deteriorated, and at 5 p.m. on July 12th, he suffered cardiac and respiratory arrest. Medical personnel, including his father, attempted to resuscitate Elias for 50 minutes, but unfortunately, all efforts were in vain, and he was pronounced dead at 6 p.m. The jury reviewed the results of Karjan's psychological evaluation, which was conducted at the request of the prosecution. The experts' findings indicated that Karjan was dishonest and hid the truth, projecting an image of decency while actually being cold and cruel. Notably, a psychological examination was conducted shortly after her husband's death, but it revealed no emotional impact from the loss, raising questions about her sincerity and reinforcing her portrayal as a self-centered woman. The examiners also detected signs of hidden hostility and impulsive behaviors in Karjan. The prosecutor questioned Karjan's claim of being a victim of gender-based violence, as she had described in her testimony. This information collectively painted a detailed psychological portrait of the defendant. After weeks of tense anticipation and continuous court proceedings, the trial finally reached its conclusion. The packed courtroom was filled with people, their eyes fixed anxiously on the jury and the judge, awaiting the verdict that would bring justice to this complex and tragic case. The prosecutor asked the jury to convict Karjan, emphasizing that the evidence pointed to her as the mastermind and perpetrator of both murders. She bought ethylene glycol, got rid of the packaging, and made it look like regular juice. As a result, her loved ones suffered and died without her assistance. The prosecution and the plaintiff urged the jury to deliver a unanimous guilty verdict, insisting it was the only way to achieve justice. They wanted Karjan to be convicted of murder with evidence of extreme cruelty. In contrast, the defense argued that there wasn't enough evidence to prove their client's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. They claimed that a person's character, good or bad, doesn't necessarily determine their involvement in a crime, and that for their client, the deaths of Rolando and his son were a devastating tragedy. Despite the defense's arguments, Karjan joined the notorious ranks of Argentine criminals who poisoned their victims. After a lengthy silence and a tense wait for the verdict, the jury delivered their decision. In a unanimous verdict, they found Karjan guilty of murdering Elias and committing the crime with exceptional cruelty. Additionally, they convicted her of Rolando's aggravated death, which was caused by an insidious procedure. Karjan, dressed in black with white beads around her neck, remained expressionless as she heard the verdict. The jury's guilty verdict resulted in her receiving a life sentence in prison. Karjan, the defendant, attempted to evade punishment for the treacherous murders that shocked society and left many unanswered questions. Her plan to cremate the victims' bodies may have been her final attempt to avoid the punishment she deserved. Nevertheless, the court and jury remained unmoved by her tactics and delivered a just verdict. Why did Karjan kill her loved ones? This question remains unanswered, a mystery that continues to baffle. On the surface, she had everything one could ask for to be happy. Yet perhaps the root of her motive lay hidden in the recesses of her own soul, driven by jealousy, self-interest, or an inflated sense of pride. Despite the heinous nature of her crime, Karjan refused to acknowledge her guilt, leaving the true motives behind this dark act unclear. Now, as Kanova faces a lengthy prison sentence, she will have ample time to reflect on the dark forces that may have consumed her, ultimately destroying not only her own life, but also those around her. This tragic tale serves as a poignant reminder that even in the closest of relationships, terrible secrets and mysteries can lurk beneath the surface, and that true love and loyalty must always be our guiding principles. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Leslie Palacio. The next major breakthrough came when Eric's car was spotted in Moreno Valley, California. Police eventually contacted Eric's cousin, who reported that he had driven Jose and his son to San Pedro, where they planned to cross the border into Mexico. The Las Vegas Police Department requested assistance from the FBI because they could not resolve the jurisdictional issue on their own. The investigation slowed down in January 2021, but for months after the discovery of the girl's remains, Eric's father, Jose, turned himself in at the border, and everyone was greatly relieved that at least one fugitive was now in custody. The man was quickly extradited back to Clark County and charged with destruction of evidence and accessory to murder. During interrogations, Jose tried to minimize his involvement in the crime, explaining the story of the trip to Mexico by his son's strange behavior on the morning of August 29th. However, investigators showed surveillance video footage that debunked his false claims, clearly showing him helping carry Leslie's body out of the house and washing the driveway. Faced with the evidence, Jose changed his testimony. He said he was working in the garage when Eric brought Leslie's body, wrapped in a sheet, into the garage. According to Jose, he panicked and helped his son load the body into the truck, assuming that Leslie had died of an overdose of illegal drugs because he saw no visible injuries on the body. Court documents indicate that Jose initially told police that, according to Eric, Leslie died of an overdose of illegal drugs. Jose also explained that Eric immediately talked about wanting to end his life, and he decided that the best thing to do for his son was to take him to Mexico. When investigators asked Jose for Eric's current whereabouts, he explained that as soon as the two of them entered Mexico and boarded the bus was searched by Mexican authorities. He and his son got scared and decided to split up, thinking that apart, it would be harder for the authorities to find them. For this reason, he would love to help the investigation, but has absolutely no idea where his son might be. On June 18, 2021, Jose formally pleaded guilty to destruction of evidence and accessory to murder. Despite the horrific characteristics of his crimes, Jose was sentenced to only 2 years in the Clark County Detention Center, causing shock and dismay in the community. The Palacio family was shocked and outraged by Jose's lenient sentence, which they felt was unjust. During the pandemonium, Jose joined the court proceedings virtually, while Leslie's family and friends attended in person. They urged the judge to impose a harsher sentence, arguing that 2 years was not enough for an accessory to murder who helped dispose of the body and hid the perpetrator. Jose pleaded guilty and tried to apologize to the Palacio family, saying his love for his son outweighed him. He expressed regret for his actions, but the Palacio family did not accept his apology and did not consider it since, to date, Eric's whereabouts remain unknown and he continues to live a free life in Mexico. Jose was released on April 28, 2022. Ofalia Markarian, the attorney and representative of the Palcio family, commented that she is absolutely furious and that this is simply unfair. Not only is the main suspect not in custody, but the one who was involved in covering up the murder is back in custody after serving only 8 months and 15 days over the past 3 years. The Palcio family has never gotten justice, and Leslie's story highlights the flaws in the justice system and raises questions about fairness in dealing with serious crimes. The Palcio family is determined to fight to change the law in Nevada because they believe that whoever was involved in the murder should receive a longer prison sentence than 2 years. They hope that the perpetrator will be found and prosecuted in the United States, where he will be charged and given the punishment he deserves. Ofalia Markarian is directly reaching out to those who may know of Eric's whereabouts in Mexico, and in every media interview she calls for the Palcio family to be given a small measure of justice. Leslie's discovery of her calling was unexpected, but she soon became an integral part of the team. Her colleagues regarded her as a responsible, professional lab technician and a warm, responsive person. While her duties involved conducting various analyses and tests, Leslie saw her role as more than just fulfilling duties. She was driven to make the testing process as comfortable as possible for patients. Her caring and patient nature created an atmosphere of trust, putting even the most apprehensive individuals at ease. When a young nurse asked if Leslie was afraid of getting her hands pierced all the time, she replied with a laugh that she now had a super ability to poke people. Her optimistic vitality was evident in every action. By all accounts, Leslie had the unique potential to become a sought-after specialist in medical laboratory diagnostics, and she would have, if not for a dramatic turn of events. Since childhood, Leslie had been accustomed to helping and caring for others. As the second of 5 daughters, she took on a maternal role when her mother, Rosalia Palacio, worked as a hotel cleaner. Rosalia remembered Leslie kicking her out of the kitchen when she tried to cook dinner after cleaning over 15 hotel rooms in a shift, gently urging her to rest. Leslie took it upon herself to prepare dinners, finding cooking to be a source of inspiration. From then on, she made sure her family members were well fed, even when she was away, calling home to ensure everyone had eaten. For Leslie, family was her top priority, and she easily inspired her sisters with her energy and ideas. Even during the pandemic, Leslie didn't let her love of sports fade away. She organized workouts in her backyard and taught her mom various exercises. She also danced daily in front of the mirror with her sister to music. Leslie's passion for experimenting with hair colors and image inspired her to create a joint business plan with her older sister to open a boutique. They started designing and sewing dresses at home in their own unique style. When Rosalia got laid off due to downsizing during the pandemic, Leslie suggested that her mom start her own small cleaning company. She promised to help her mom with cleaning services in her free time from work and school. At a family council, Leslie reassured her mom, "We'll be fine soon, you'll see." They came up with a name for the company, Palacio Cleaning Service. Leslie's dreams were finally taking shape as their family firm landed its first contract. But on August 29, 2020, all their plans and dreams came to a halt. By the end of August 2020, Leslie had completed the lab assistant program, and the family firm received a large order. Feeling stressed and worried, Leslie decided it was time to take a break and enjoy an evening of dancing and fun. With pandemic restrictions slowly lifting and Las Vegas coming alive, she felt it was the perfect time to unwind. Leslie's friends refused to accompany her, even though people were gradually overcoming their fears and returning to their normal routines. They were still uneasy about being in crowded, enclosed spaces. Despite this, Leslie remained hopeful of finding someone to share a fun evening with, so she posted on Instagram about her desire to do something unexpected. To her surprise, Eric Rangel Ibarra responded to her post. Leslie and Eric's families had attended the same church for 14 years and occasionally socialized, making them childhood acquaintances, though they had never been close. Leslie was aware of Eric's interests and had received friendly texts from him in the past, but she had never reciprocated his attention. She had always been polite to him, though. Ordinarily, Leslie would have turned down Eric's offer to keep her company, but this time, she was eager to break the monotony of her daily life with a fun evening, so she decided to accept his proposal. Leslie's friends were busy, so she took Eric up on his offer to share Las Vegas nightlife stories. Despite some unease, she decided going out with Eric was better than staying solo. Leslie regularly checked in with her sister, detailing her whereabouts and activities. When she mentioned Eric wasn't drinking, Kayla joked about healthy living. Eric and Leslie's first destination was the casino at the Longhorn Hotel. They arrived at 1:31 a.m. on August 29th in Eric's white Ford F-250, as shown by the surveillance footage reviewed by the police later. The couple spent about 25 minutes inside the casino, leaving at 1:56 a.m. After their casino visit, Leslie kept her sister updated on their activities, sending a message at 4:40 a.m. However, Leslie's next message was alarming, saying, "I need to talk to you about something shitty." Her sister inquired about the issue, but Leslie didn't respond. Instead, a text box appeared, indicating that Leslie had started to type a response, but never sent it. Unfortunately, this was the last message Leslie sent during her lifetime. The following morning, Leslie still hadn't returned home, and her family grew increasingly worried as the hours passed. Initially, they assumed Leslie had spent the night at Eric's house, but as time went on, their confusion deepened. Eventually, the family decided to check on Leslie at Eric's house, where they stumbled upon a suspicious scene. Eric's mother and daughter were removing furniture, pretending they had only just learned that Leslie and Eric had been together the previous evening. Fortunately, Leslie's family arrived at Eric's house just in time, preventing a significant delay in the investigation. The police found bloodstains in the house and a messy bedroom, suggesting that Eric's mother and sister had spent the day packing up their belongings, including furniture, instead of cleaning up evidence of a crime. This indicated that they were not going on a short trip, but rather planning a long-term absence, likely to reunite with Eric and his father, Jose, who had fled to Mexico to avoid prosecution. When Mrs. Ibarra met the Palazzo family, she likely realized their chance to escape had passed, and the panicked mother and daughter began denying any knowledge of Leslie's evening with Eric. Their suspicious behavior aroused suspicion that something serious had occurred. Luckily, the Las Vegas police acted quickly, issuing a billing inquiry to track Leslie's movements from the previous night. Although it took time to receive the data, the Palazzo family didn't wait and launched a campaign to spread the word about Leslie's disappearance. The community responded, sharing the information on social media, and surprisingly, many people, including Eric's mom, showed they cared. Detectives continued to question Mrs. Ibarra, seeking more information, and on August 31st, she went to the police station to file a missing persons report for her husband and son. Mrs. Ibarra claimed that her son, Eric, had left their home late on the evening of August 28th, returning the next morning, behaving strangely. She watched as he walked out the door again, but this time, he never came back. Police probed Leslie's disappearance and that of Eric and his dad. The Las Vegas police joined the case, searching for clues. Detectives canvassed the neighborhood, seeking surveillance cameras. They found cameras at a house opposite Jose Barr's home, which might yield crucial evidence. They also obtained billing records, tracking Leslie's movements on August 29th, shedding light on the mystery. Detectives discovered that the couple visited a casino and then went to a grill bar, arriving around 2:15 a.m. Leslie's cell phone was left behind at the bar, and records show that she left the establishment around 5:50 a.m. Shortly after, at 6:05 a.m., neighborhood cameras captured Eric's car pulling up to their family home. The footage clearly showed that Leslie was heavily intoxicated as Eric assisted her out of the car and into the house. Later at 7:25 a.m., Eric and his father Jose were seen carrying Leslie's body, wrapped in a sheet, out of the house and placing it in the trunk of the car. Eric then drove away, while Jose hosed down the driveway to their house. This suggested that Eric and Jose were not missing persons, but rather fugitives trying to avoid justice. After reviewing the footage, police obtained a search warrant for Eric's home, leading to the discovery of additional evidence indicating that Leslie did not leave the house voluntarily. The house had been cleaned with strong cleaning products in an attempt to conceal evidence, and latex gloves and trash bags were also found. Furthermore, traces of blood were discovered on the floor and bed in Eric's room, strongly suggesting an assault. Without DNA testing, it was evident to investigators that the blood belonged to Leslie. From that point on, the search for Leslie Palau focused on finding her body. Meanwhile, Eric and Jose were reported missing, and investigators worked to identify suspects. The Palacio family, shaken by the events, also took action. Roselia, Leslie's mother, reached out to the church community for help in searching for her daughter's body. As a result, search volunteers, flyers, and posters featuring Leslie's photo and images of Eric and Jose began circulating on social media, in newspapers, and on street poles. The family appealed to the public to assist in finding the two men involved in Leslie's death. The first significant breakthrough in the investigation came when a license plate reader detected Eric's car just 6 miles from his home at 10 a.m., about 4 hours after Leslie's alleged murder. This discovery led investigators to believe that the body might be hidden within a 4-hour drive from Eric's home, possibly on the Nevada-Arizona border or in the Charleston Peak area. This was still a vast region, and detectives were eager for any additional information that could help them pinpoint a more specific location. Once again, luck was on their side when a gas station 40 miles north of Las Vegas captured footage of Eric's car pulling off the highway toward the Valley of Fire National Park. 20 minutes later, the car reappeared with muddy tires. This discovery narrowed the search area and indicated that the body was likely to be found within 20 miles of the gas station. The presence of mud on the tires suggested that Eric had driven off the road at some point. Detectives searched the area, and on September 9th, during a second search, they found Leslie Palau's body hidden behind a bush. News outlets immediately broke the story. The body of 22-year-old Leslie Palacio had been found near the Valley of Fire 11 days after she went missing. A reporter joined the broadcast, providing additional details about the prime suspect, 25-year-old Eric Rangel Ibarra. The Valley of Fire, where the body was found, is known for its extremely hot climate, which led to rapid decomposition of the remains. As a result, forensic experts were unable to determine the exact cause of death. Locals were horrified and fearful after Leslie's death, with some becoming too afraid to venture outside due to the constant thoughts of the notorious criminals involved in the murder. The day after Leslie's body was found, September 10th, a large crowd comprising friends, relatives, neighbors, and local residents gathered to pay their respects to her memory. They took the candles used in the nightly vigil and placed them in front of her house, expressing their desire for the perpetrator to face justice for his heinous act. At this point, the quest for justice was far from over. A major breakthrough in the case came when Eric's car was spotted in Moreno Valley, California. This led police to contact Eric's cousin, who revealed that he had driven Jose and his son to San Pedro, where they intended to cross the border into Mexico. The Las Vegas Police Department requested the FBI's assistance due to jurisdictional issues they couldn't resolve on their own. Although the investigation slowed down in January 2021, there was a significant development months after the girls' remains were discovered. Eric's father, Jose, turned himself in at the border, bringing relief that at least one fugitive was now in custody. Jose was quickly extradited back to Clark County, where he was charged with destroying evidence and being an accessory to murder. During questioning, Jose attempted to downplay his role in the crime, citing his son's strange behavior on the morning of August 29th as the reason for their trip to Mexico. However, investigators presented surveillance video footage that contradicted his false claims, clearly showing him helping to carry Leslie's body out of the house and washing the driveway. Jose altered his testimony when confronted with the evidence. According to his revised account, he was working in the garage when Eric arrived with Leslie's body, wrapped in a sheet. Jose claimed he panicked and helped his son load the body into the truck, believing Leslie had died from a drug overdose due to the lack of visible injuries. Initially, Jose told police that Eric had stated Leslie died from a drug overdose. Jose also recalled that Eric had suicidal thoughts and, as a concerned father, decided to take him to Mexico. When questioned about Eric's current location, Jose explained that after crossing into Mexico and boarding a bus, they were searched by Mexican authorities. Feeling frightened, they decided to separate, thinking it would be harder for authorities to track them down. As a result, Jose was willing to cooperate with the investigation, but genuinely had no idea where his son was. On June 18, 2021, Jose pleaded guilty to destroying evidence and being an accessory to murder. Despite the heinous nature of his crimes, he was sentenced to just 2 years at the Clark County Detention Center, a decision that shocked and outraged the community. The Palcio family was particularly appalled by the lenient sentence, which they considered unfair. During the sentencing hearing, Jose participated virtually, while Leslie's family and friends attended in person. They implored the judge to impose a harsher sentence, arguing that 2 years was insufficient punishment for an accessory to murder who had helped dispose of the body and conceal the perpetrator. Jose apologized to the Palcio family, stating that his love for his son had outweighed his moral obligations. He expressed remorse for his actions, but the Palcio family rejected his apology, citing that Eric's whereabouts remain unknown to this day, and he continues to live freely in Mexico. Jose was released from detention on April 28, 2022. Ofalia Markarian, the Palcio family's attorney and representative, is outraged over the glaring injustice in the handling of Leslie's murder case. Despite the primary suspect remaining at large, the individual who aided in covering up the crime has been released from custody after serving a mere 8 months and 15 days over the past 3 years. The Palcio family is still awaiting justice, and Leslie's story highlights the flaws in the justice system, sparking concerns about the fairness of handling serious crimes. The family is determined to push for legal reform in Nevada, advocating for those involved in the murder to face longer prison sentences than 2 years. They hope the perpetrator will be found and prosecuted in the United States, where they will receive the punishment they deserve. Through media interviews, Ofalia Markarian is making a direct appeal to anyone with information about Eric's whereabouts in Mexico, urging them to come forward so the Palcio family can finally receive some measure of justice. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Kristen Rossum. Kristen Rossum, a chemistry graduate student at San Diego State University, had the potential for a bright future. However, she is now serving a life sentence at a women's facility in Central California for crimes committed against her husband, Ralph, and Constance Rossum. Kristen is a mother of 3, and despite her efforts to prepare them for a successful future, her own life took a different turn. Her children were receiving a well-rounded education with regular schooling, tutors, and participation in extracurricular activities designed to develop their talents. However, Kristen, who was fragile and impulsive, struggled to maintain this pace. She began to skip classes and sought escape from her reality, initially finding comfort and forgetfulness in this avoidance. However, after consuming alcohol, the calming effect wore off, and Kristen became dependent on methamphetamine, the most addictive illegal substance in the United States. The drug induced clouds of paranoia, euphoria, and hallucinations, leading to Kristen's erratic behavior and detachment from reality, as well as a lack of parental attention. Kristen confessed to being addicted to substances since her high school days, which was devastating news for her family of college-educated professionals. After months of turmoil with her parents, the 17-year-old Kristen secretly left home and went on vacation to Mexico with her friends, where she met Gregory DeVette, a tall, handsome man, 7 years her senior. Gregory took on a paternal role, and Kristen landed a job at the local forensic department as a toxicology assistant, impressing her employers with her skills and momentarily forgetting her addiction. Her position in toxicology gave Kristen access to controlled substances, and she went on to graduate from college with honors. Her relationship with Gregory lasted about 5 years, culminating in a grand wedding on May 5, 1999. Kristen's parents adored Gregory and were convinced that their daughter had overcome her dependency and was headed towards a life of great promise and happiness. In March 2000, Kristen landed a job as a toxicologist at the San Diego County Medical Examiner's Office, where she learned to analyze body fluids for controlled substances. However, she soon became disillusioned with her mundane life and sought thrills elsewhere. She found an opportunity with her new colleague, Michael Robertson, who had just been appointed head of the department. As their romance blossomed, Kristen's marriage to Gregory began to unravel, despite his efforts to save it. Aware of his wife's vulnerabilities, Gregory struggled to hold on, but Kristen had made up her mind. On Monday, May 6th, she asked for a divorce. On November, Kristen went to work as usual, but she was very tired and worried about her husband Greg, who was sick and stayed home. In the days following their difficult conversation, Kristen was uneasy, but Greg seemed calm and indifferent. Uncharacteristically, Kristen informed her workplace about her husband's illness and visited him during her lunch break. That same day, at 9:22 p.m., Greg was asleep, and Kristen called the emergency services to report that her husband was not breathing, fearing he might have taken his own life. Overwhelmed with emotion, Kristen cried on the phone and didn't follow the dispatcher's instructions to examine Greg's body and potentially administer first aid. The police and paramedics arrived at the scene at 10:19 p.m. and found Greg lying lifeless on the bedroom floor, surrounded by scattered rose petals, with an exposed stem nearby. A preliminary examination revealed that Greg had likely consumed a lethal dose of multiple controlled substances, with empty vials of strong painkillers scattered around the room. Torn wedding photos were also found in his bed. During the interrogation, Kristen stated that she had told Greg about their separation the previous night, a mere 17 months after their wedding. Kristen regretted marrying him, feeling she had rushed into it. She mentioned that Greg was too clingy and she wanted space. Greg's death was officially classified as a suicide, with the autopsy revealing that he had succumbed to a lethal dose of strong sedatives. Kristen gave her consent for the cremation to proceed, but Gregory's family and friends were adamant that he would never take his own life. None of them had noticed any unusual changes in his personality or mood that might have hinted at his supposed suicide. In fact, Greg was known to be strongly opposed to controlled substances and would never resort to using them. His relatives were so convinced of foul play that they intervened to stop the cremation, demanding an independent autopsy to uncover the truth. The family's persistence led investigators to consider a murder scenario soon after the incident. An autopsy revealed a significant amount of fentanyl, a painkiller 150 times stronger than morphine, as well as smaller amounts of clonazepam and traces of oxycodone. Investigators suspected that someone else might have administered the lethal dose of fentanyl to Gregory, given the strong influence of clonazepam and other drugs found in his system. Since fentanyl is not an over-the-counter drug, Kristen became the prime suspect due to her knowledge and access to these substances. She was subsequently questioned by the police. During the police questioning, Kristen's disheveled appearance and erratic behavior suggested she was struggling with drug dependence, which she confirmed in her testimony. On the day of Gregory's death, Kristen's account of events was inconsistent. She initially told paramedics that Gregory had not taken any medication, but later suggested he might have been taking oxycodone. At the hospital, Kristen told a nurse that Gregory might have overdosed on oxycodone. Like other opioids, oxycodone can not only relieve pain, but also produce feelings of euphoria. However, it can weaken the respiratory system, and if not treated promptly, its use can be fatal. During their conversation with Kristen, police considered the possibility that Gregory's death was an accidental overdose of cold medicine and oxycodone. They also learned that Gregory was distressed about their failed marriage, which led Kristen to claim that he had taken his own life. This sparked another investigation, which uncovered more details. On November 8th, Russ Lowe, a co-worker of Kristen's, contacted the police and informed them about Kristen's affair with her boss, Dr. Robertson. This new information shifted the direction of the police investigation. Investigators found evidence of Kristen's relationship with Dr. Robertson, including passionate emails and computer files. They also discovered Dr. Robertson's expertise in fentanyl through professional articles. The evidence pieced together to suggest that Gregory had become a threat to the lovers. As Kristen had access to labs and controlled substances, it was suspected that she was secretly using them, and Dr. Robertson was covering for her. Dr. Robertson told detectives that he was aware of his lover's drug addiction. Although no charges were filed against the couple at the time, they were both fired for violating several rules during the investigation. Serious trouble began for Kristen in January when police raided her house, finding drug traces and evidence of personal drug use. She was arrested but later released on bail. As the investigation progressed, new information emerged, including her diary, which was seized during the initial search. Apparently, Kristen tried to conceal her involvement and assert her innocence by creating the illusion that her husband Gregory's death was self-inflicted. On the day of his death, she bought a rose, revealing her internal motivations. The medical examination revealed that Gregory was unconscious for at least 6 hours before he died, and his death may have occurred an hour or an hour and a half before it was officially confirmed. Furthermore, bruises were found around the needle mark on his arm. A shortage of the drug that led to Gregory's death, as well as other controlled substances, were discovered at Kristen's workplace. Police believe Kristen poisoned Gregory with alcohol and fentanyl without his knowledge. Kristen was arrested on June 25, 2001, and charged with first-degree murder. After 6 months in detention, she was released on bail, and the first trial began soon after. The prosecution's main theory was that she killed Gregory because he threatened to damage her good girl reputation by revealing her repeated drug use and affair with Michael Robertson. The prosecution alleged that Kristen fatally poisoned Gregory with fentanyl, a synthetic opiate that is 80 times more potent than morphine. According to them, Kristen initially attempted to kill Gregory using clonazepam, but after this attempt failed, she administered the fentanyl. The prosecution also contended that Kristen subsequently staged the scene in the bedroom to give the impression that Gregory had committed suicide by tearing out pages from her diary, scattering rose petals around his body, and positioning a wedding photo nearby. The court was told that Kristen, a biochemistry graduate, used her knowledge of drugs and chemistry to kill Gregory. Prosecutors alleged that Kristen tried to make her colleagues at the medical examiner's office believe Gregory's death was a suicide by withholding information about the fentanyl. However, before the autopsy could take place, Kristen was transferred to a different laboratory, and attempts to alter the toxicology report were unsuccessful. It was stated that on the morning of November 6th, Kristen phoned the owner of Gregory's apartment to report his absence, then went to work. Her colleagues testified that about an hour after arriving at the lab around 9 a.m., Kristen was seen crying in her manager Michael's office. The apartment building where Kristen and Gregory lived reported seeing Kristen return home at 12:10 p.m. At 12:41 p.m., she visited a local grocery store, buying several items, including a credit card statement with red roses, which confirmed she was still alive a few hours before Gregory's death. Kristen made several calls to Dr. Michael Brian Blackburn, the San Diego County medical examiner who performed Gregory's autopsy. Dr. Blackburn testified that Gregory had been dead for at least an hour before the paramedics arrived. At the time of death, Gregory was in the early stages of bronchopneumonia, a condition that occurs when breathing secretions accumulate in the lungs due to unconsciousness or inadequate breathing. The doctor also noted that Gregory's bladder contained a substantial amount of urine, which would have caused significant discomfort if he were conscious. From this, Dr. Blackburn inferred that Gregory had experienced breathing difficulties for around 6 to 12 hours before his death. Dr. Blackburn testified that the amount of clonazepam in Gregory's blood was insufficient to cause an overdose and was not the cause of death. In contrast, Dr. Theodore Stanley, testifying for the prosecution, explained that fentanyl is a powerful and fast-acting painkiller with serious side effects, including the potential to lead to respiratory arrest. The speed at which fentanyl takes effect depends on how it is administered, with peak effects occurring approximately 16 hours after a transdermal patch is applied, 20 to 30 minutes after oral administration, 15 to 20 minutes after intramuscular injection, and within 5 minutes of intravenous injection. Dr. Stanley noted that fentanyl is not usually given orally because the liver breaks down about 65% of it, leaving only 35% to enter the bloodstream. Both Dr. Blackburn and Dr. Stanley were unable to provide a clear explanation for how fentanyl entered Gregory's system. However, Dr. Stanley suggested that the varying concentrations of fentanyl in Gregory's body, combined with evidence that he was unconscious and breathing shallowly in the hours leading up to his death, indicate that fentanyl may have been administered to him. Although the prosecutor could not definitively explain how Kristen poisoned Gregory, the evidence suggested that she might have applied a fentanyl patch to his arm while he was sleeping. The fact that 15 patches went missing from the lab where Kristen previously worked supports this possibility. The defense claims Kristen is innocent, acknowledging that fentanyl caused Gregory's death, but arguing that he intentionally took it to end his life due to desperation stemming from family problems. In court, Kristen testified that on November 6th, she woke up to find Gregory in distress. At 7:42 a.m., she called his employer to report his illness and absence from work. Kristen told the court she went to her job but returned home to check on Gregory, asking why he was so upset. Gregory told her he felt unwell, having taken oxycodone and clonazepam, and planned to stay home and sleep. Under cross-examination, the prosecutor questioned Kristen's explanation, pointing out its strangeness. Kristen admitted to previously lying and hiding Gregory's drug use. The prosecutor suggested to the court that fentanyl was the ideal poison due to its difficulty in detection, knowledge Kristen likely acquired from her job. According to autopsy and toxicology results, Gregory was unconscious for around 6 to 8 hours, contradicting Kristen's claim of having lunch with him that day. The defense argued that Dr. Blackburn's finding of non-fatal blood levels of clonazepam was irrelevant because the combination of oxycodone, an opiate, and clonazepam, a benzodiazepine, can create a synergistic effect, making them more potent together. They suggested that Gregory may have unintentionally taken the drugs himself and questioned why the high levels of these substances in his system remained unexplained. After 8 hours of deliberation, the jury found Kristen guilty of first-degree murder and murder under special circumstances by poisoning. She was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Despite maintaining her innocence and pleading no contest, Kristen's appeal was unsuccessful due to a mistake by her own defense team. They acknowledged that fentanyl caused Gregory's death, but failed to test autopsy samples for fentanyl metabolites, which could have determined whether Gregory ingested fentanyl or if the fentanyl found in the samples resulted from laboratory contamination after his death. The appeals court was told that there was a problem with the handling of the autopsy samples, which could have affected their integrity. Specifically, the samples were stored in an unsealed cardboard box, with each container labeled as coming from Gregory's body. The box was left at the medical examiner's office for about 36 hours before being sent to the forensic laboratory, which raised concerns that someone with access to the office could have tampered with the samples during that time. Kristen's appeal argued that on November 8, 2000, Michael had informed a toxicologist that he had tested a sample of Gregory's stomach contents for fentanyl breakdown products. However, this information was not included in the original autopsy report. The Court of Appeal ruled that Kristen's lawyer should have objected to the prosecution's claim that her husband died from a fentanyl overdose and should have tested the autopsy samples for substances that break down into fentanyl, instead of just accepting that as the cause of death. Although the conviction was not overturned, the case was sent back to the federal court to determine whether this mistake by the defense could have changed the trial's outcome. U.S. Supreme Court ruled federal courts must respect state court decisions, denying Kristen's appeal and keeping her in custody. Her trial named Michael Robertson, Kristen Rossum's former boss and lover, as co-defendant. Though he's lived freely in Australia since 2000, he could be arrested and bailed for $100,000 if he returns to the U.S. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Kendra Hatcher. Kendra Hatcher was born on February 3, 1980, in Springfield, Sangamon County, Illinois, to Reagan Hatcher and Bonnie Gibson Jameson Colley. Her parents divorced, and her mother later married Bruce Jimon. She had 3 sisters, Jamie Coleman Ashel Lepom, Melissa Jameson, and a brother, Neil Hatcher. Kendra grew up in Pleasant Plains, where she studied dentistry. After getting divorced in 2010, she moved to Dallas and started working at Smile Zone, a dental studio. As a devout Christian, Kendra wanted to use her dental skills to help others, providing free services to disadvantaged children at the clinic. In her spare time, Kendra was involved in various activities, including teaching Bible studies and participating in volunteer programs. These programs involved building churches abroad and providing free dental services to children in Ecuador. After moving to Dallas, Kendra's professional career took off rapidly. Her personal life also began to blossom when she met Dr. Ricardo Palacios through a dating app on May 24, 2015. Kendra and Ricardo shared similar values, interests, and life goals. Ricardo was completing his dermatology residency at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center. Despite having only been together for a few months, they were already discussing their upcoming marriage. A tragic incident in a parking lot took the life of Kendra, cutting short all their future plans. Upon arriving at the crime scene, investigators examined the evidence and initially suspected robbery as the motive, given that Kendra's purse and some valuables were missing. They found bullet fragments and a gun magazine near her body. However, the circumstances of the shooting and the bullet wounds suggested that robbery was not the primary motive. One bullet struck Kendra in the back, while the other hit her in the head. The entry wound was at the top of her head, and the bullet exited through her chin, indicating that she had her hands up and behind her head when she was shot. The murder theory was later confirmed when investigators obtained CCTV footage and reconstructed the events. The footage showed a black Jeep Grand Cherokee entering the parking lot at 7:15 p.m. 30 minutes later, Kendra returned home and parked in the same garage. Shortly after, a man approached her, shot her, and then ran to the side before jumping into the Jeep and driving off. Although the video quality was poor and the crime scene was not clearly visible, the authorities were unable to identify the assailant. However, they put the vehicle on a wanted list and appealed to the public for assistance. A man named Ortiz contacted the police after recognizing his car and footage related to the shooting. Ortiz claimed that, although the car belonged to him, he was not involved in the shooting and was not driving it at the time. He explained that, on the morning of September 2nd, he had lent his Jeep to 2 of his girlfriends, Brenda Delgado and Crystal Cortez, who asked to borrow it until the evening. Later that evening, Brenda called Ortiz to meet her at a restaurant where they were at the time of the crime. Meanwhile, Crystal Cortez drove the Jeep back to Ortiz's house. When Ortiz saw his Jeep on the TV news, he confronted Brenda, who initially denied that it was his Jeep, then admitted that Crystal had used it without his knowledge. Brenda tried to persuade Ortiz not to report the incident, offering to pay to have the Jeep repainted. At first, Ortiz was hesitant to get involved with the police, fearing it might jeopardize his pending U.S. citizenship. However, he eventually decided to cooperate and provided the police with the names of Brenda and Crystal. The police then tracked the movements of the Jeep on the day of the crime and located the two women. Brenda Delgado was the first to be questioned, but she claimed to have no knowledge of Kendra Hatcher and provided an alibi, stating she was at a restaurant with Ortiz at the time of the crime and produced receipts as proof. However, as the investigation continued, the truth slowly emerged, revealing the attempts by the perpetrators to conceal their involvement. Brenda Delgado came from a modest family. Her parents, Luis and Maria, immigrated to Dallas from Mexico, where her father worked in a factory. Brenda excelled academically and dreamed of attending medical school, but her parents couldn't afford the tuition. After high school, she continued to live with her parents, working as a dental assistant and at a spa, while still aspiring to a more affluent and beautiful life. Brenda balanced her dental assistant job with spa work, where she whitened her teeth. In 2012, she fell for Ricardo at a Jennifer Lopez concert. 3 months later, she moved in with him. Ricardo was smitten, meeting her parents, and Brenda gushed about her love in a Facebook birthday post. Brenda discovered she was pregnant, but Ricardo convinced her to have an abortion, leaving her devastated. After recovering from the ordeal, Brenda focused on her career and her beloved Ricky. She enrolled in Stanford that fall. Although it seemed like Brenda had moved on from the breakup, she was still hurting. Her obsession with Ricardo intensified, and when Ricky posted a photo with his new girlfriend, Kendra, a model-like beauty, Brenda was consumed by dark thoughts. Those close to her claimed she fantasized about harming Kendra. Investigators suspected Brenda had a strong motive to harm her rival. Ricardo confirmed that Brenda Delgado was his ex-girlfriend, and they had an on-again, off-again relationship from 2012 to 2015. They broke up a few months before Ricky met Kendra. Despite this, Ricardo believed he and Brenda remained friends and didn't think there was any bad blood between Brenda and Kendra. The reconstructed events revealed a disturbing picture of how manipulative and ruthless an abused woman can be. Brenda Delgado concocted a sinister plan to win back her former lover, Ricardo, and eliminate Kendra Hatcher, the woman he had moved on to. Initially, Brenda posed as Ricardo's supportive friend, pretending to take an interest in his relationship with Kendra. Unbeknownst to Ricardo, she gathered information about their future plans, which he naively believed was genuine concern. After Kendra's death, Ricardo confided in Brenda via text message, pouring out his grief. Brenda feigned sympathy, offering to help him in any way possible. Unaware of her true intentions, Ricardo trusted her completely. What he didn't know was that Brenda had been secretly manipulating him for months. She had been snooping on his mail, learning about his plans with Kendra, including their travel arrangements. This discovery fueled her anger, and she became fixated on eliminating Kendra, whom she believed had usurped her place in Ricardo's life. Brenda took control of Ricardo's phone account and used it to stalk him, keeping close tabs on his activities and those of his girlfriend Kendra. This obsession soon became her sole purpose in life. Brenda's fixation on stalking eventually led her to quit her job and dedicate all her time to achieving her twisted goals. Over time, she devised a cruel and terrifying plan to murder Kendra and take her place beside Ricardo. To put her plan into action, Brenda approached several acquaintances with an offer to harm Kendra in exchange for money. She eventually found a 21-year-old single mother, Crystal Cortez, who was struggling financially and willing to assist her. Crystal recruited a perpetrator, Christopher Love, who agreed to commit the crime. Brenda paid Crystal $500 and provided her with illegal substances, which Crystal then passed on to Christopher. Several women were tasked with following Kendra to learn her daily routines and identify the best location and time to carry out the crime. On September 2, 2015, they borrowed Jose's car. Crystal and Christopher lay in wait for Kendra in the parking lot, but lost their nerve and didn't follow her home from work due to fear of getting stuck in traffic. Later that evening, they finally carried out their sinister plan and were rewarded for their efforts. A few days after the crime, Crystal Cortez and Christopher Love were arrested. They both denied any involvement in the crime and claimed they were not at the scene. However, when the police found the murder weapon in the car, Love's story fell apart. Meanwhile, Crystal's alibi was inconsistent and confusing. At first, she claimed she was driving in the parking lot because an armed carjacker had taken over her SUV and forced her there. She even falsely stated that her young son was with her, but surveillance cameras showed no evidence of a child. As the investigation continued and more evidence emerged, Crystal changed her story again, this time offering to cooperate with the police in exchange for a reduced sentence. She implicated Brenda, claiming that she was the mastermind behind the crime and that they had been planning it for 2 weeks. According to Crystal, Brenda's obsession with winning back her ex-boyfriend, Ricardo, drove her to despise Kendra, whom she believed had taken her place. Brenda had pretended to be happy for Ricardo, but her life was actually unraveling. According to Crystal, Brenda decided to get rid of Kendra Hatcher at this point. In Crystal's testimony, she detailed how Brenda devised a plan to kill Kendra, enlisting her support. Brenda and Crystal started formulating a plan to kill Kendra, meeting several times and developing multiple plans. Initially, they planned to inject Kendra with illegal substances or sedatives and then dispose of her body. However, to avoid suspicion, Brenda needed a reliable enforcer and began looking for one. They drove around rough neighborhoods, asking people if they could help, which led them to Christopher Love, who agreed to help and participated in deciding the method of the crime. The three of them decided that shooting Kendra would be the quickest way to kill her. Crystal cooperated with authorities, revealing September 2nd wasn't a random choice. Brenda knew Kendra and Ricardo were going to Mexico, so they decided to kill Kendra before their trip. They wanted it to look like a botched robbery. Brenda and Crystal tracked Kendra's movements for days, noting her activities minute by minute. They traced her route home and entered the apartment complex's parking garage on September 1st, 2015, to set up the crime. Brenda and Crystal made a final check on the day of the crime. They picked up the Jeep and Christopher, dropping Brenda at the library to establish an alibi. Crystal and Christopher waited near Kendra's apartment, then followed her, losing her in traffic. They waited at her house, and when she arrived, Christopher shot her. Crystal claimed she didn't see it but heard the shot. She drove Christopher home, picked up her son, and returned the Jeep to Jose. Brenda's plan had finally come to fruition. She had eliminated her rival, and all she had to do was wait for a message from her beloved Ricardo. Brenda was thrilled to have committed the perfect crime. However, Crystal's subsequent confession and testimony against Brenda left no doubt about her guilt, and a warrant for her arrest was promptly issued. When the police arrived with the warrant, Brenda was no longer at home, having fled to Mexico using her dual citizenship. Brenda's involvement in a contract killing came to light after she fled, and on April 6, 2016, she was placed on the FBI's wanted list. With a $100,000 reward offered for information about her, she became the 9th woman to ever be listed among the most wanted fugitives, and the only woman on the list at the time. However, her freedom was short-lived, as she was apprehended just 2 days later in Torreon, Coahuila, by Mexican authorities, who extradited her to the United States on October 6, but only on the condition that she would not face the death penalty. Brenda was charged with capital murder in the U.S. At her 2017 Texas trial, relatives of Kendra and Ricardo spoke out. Witnesses testified, confirming Brenda's intentions and obsession with her ex. Her cousin Moses revealed Brenda's depression and her attempt to hire him to hurt Kendra. Brenda was obsessed with Ricardo, said friend Jennifer Escobar. Brenda read Ricardo's emails, tracked his movements, and had his house key and bank access. She asked Jennifer to kill or disable Kendra Hatcher, offering $2,000, a car, and drugs. Jennifer refused after consulting her parents. In court, multiple people who knew Brenda testified about her obsession, and it was established that Brenda had a motive to want Kendra dead. She viewed Kendra as an obstacle to getting what she wanted, specifically reuniting with Ricky. In the months leading up to Kendra's death, Brenda's obsession grew increasingly intense, as corroborated by evidence presented in court. This evidence included an ATM withdrawal receipt for $500, which Brenda later gave to Crystal as payment for her role, as well as a $600 cash payment received by Christopher Love. Furthermore, cell phone records revealed that Brenda, Crystal, and Christopher were together before the crime, with over 99 calls exchanged between Brenda and Crystal between August 22nd and September 4th, demonstrating their frequent communication to discuss the plan to kill Kendra Hatcher. Despite an alibi and receipts showing she was at a restaurant, the jury quickly found her guilty of Kendra Hatcher's murder. Delgado was sentenced to life without parole. Crystal Cortez, who cooperated with the investigation and pleaded guilty, received a 35-year prison sentence with parole eligibility. The Hatcher family expressed satisfaction with the court's decision and quietly left the courtroom following the verdict. On the other hand, the Delgado family, who knew Brenda as a loving daughter and woman with strong Christian values, refused to believe she was involved until the end. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Sydney Loof. Sydney Irene Loof was born on August 21, 1993 in Broken Bow, Nebraska, to George and Susan Loof. She spent her childhood in Arcadia with her parents until 2000, when the family moved to Ney, where her mother worked as a special education teacher and her father was the school principal. Growing up, Sydney was an energetic and outdoor-oriented girl who loved nature. Her father, George, often took her fishing during her school years. She was also involved in sports, playing basketball and golf, where she showed promise. However, she developed scoliosis, which forced her to give up many of her favorite activities and ended her sports career. After graduating from high school in 2011, Sydney found employment at a local Menards store that specialized in home improvement products. Despite moving from Norfolk to Lincoln for work, Sydney remained close to her family, who made an effort to stay in touch almost daily and regularly met for dinner. Although she lived independently, Sydney frequently returned to her parents' house. Sydney had been battling depression, feeling that the medications she was on were actually making her condition worse. Her mom, Susie, was deeply concerned and urged her to see a new doctor, who prescribed different medications. During phone calls with her mom, Sydney's voice sounded increasingly optimistic as she reported that her mental state was improving. She was attempting to make positive changes in her life, including searching for a new job, as working in a store didn't fulfill her ambitions. However, she was still uncertain about her career goals, which contributed to her feelings of depression. By November 2017, Sydney's mental health had taken a turn for the worse, leading her to take antidepressants and occasionally smoke marijuana. Despite her family and friends offering support, she yearned for romance and love. As a young modern woman with an interest in the same gender, Sydney sometimes turned to social media to find potential dates. To expand her social circle and find a friend, she used Tinder, a popular dating app. In November 2017, Sydney met a man named Aubrey online, and they started exchanging messages. They quickly discovered they had a lot in common, including a love for gambling, hiking, and good food. After just 100 messages, they decided to meet in person on November 14th. Sydney visited Aubrey at his home in Wilbur, and their first meeting went really well. They hit it off and agreed to meet again the following day at Aubrey's house. Before their second meeting, Sydney worked her shift at the store, went home, and got ready. She even took a photo of herself and posted it on Tinder with the caption, "Ready for my date." When Aubrey arrived, they drove off together. The next day, however, Sydney failed to show up for work, which was unusual for the normally reliable Sydney. Despite her high spirits in the days leading up to her disappearance, her family was worried when her coworkers informed them that she hadn't shown up. Sydney's mother, Susie, revealed that her daughter had been struggling with anxiety and depression in the days leading up to her disappearance. Sydney had discussed her deteriorating mental health with her family, who advised her to see a doctor again to take antidepressants. That was the last time Sydney's family saw her. When Sydney's parents went to her apartment, they were extremely surprised to find that she had left her favorite cat, Mimsy, without food or water. This was extremely unlike the caring pet owner they knew Sydney to be. Concerned, they reported Sydney missing to the police. During a welfare check of Sydney's home, the police found the apartment locked and saw nothing out of the ordinary. However, the family remained adamant that something was wrong, and the police took their concerns seriously. On November 16, 2017, Sydney Loof was reported missing after failing to arrive at her workplace, the Menards store showroom on 27th Street in Cornhusker Highway. Sydney had a spinal condition that affected her gait, making her stand out in a crowd. At the time of her disappearance, she was wearing a white Columbia brand jacket and a cream-colored shirt. According to her parents, Sydney told her friend on Snapchat on Wednesday morning that she had gone on a date with a man she met online the previous night and planned to meet up with her again that evening. Her car was found in Northeast Lincoln, and police conducted interviews, searching for any leads that could help locate Sydney. A massive search effort was launched to find Sydney, featuring highway billboards with her photo and a televised manhunt. Susie remained adamant that something had happened to her daughter after her date. To support her claim, she shared a screenshot of a Snapchat post by Sydney, captioned, "Ready for my date." Sydney's friends confirmed that she was planning to meet a woman named Aubrey, whom she met on Tinder. During the investigation, police examined Sydney's phone records and surveillance footage from her workplace, which led them to identify a key person of interest. They traced Sydney's last phone signal to a cell tower in the Wilbur neighborhood, likely close to Aubrey's residence, although they had no information about Aubrey's identity at the time. Authorities started looking for a man named Aubrey, who was the last person to see Sydney before she went missing. The problem was that no one knew Aubrey's real identity or if he even existed. Sydney's friend Brooklyn took matters into her own hands and decided to track down Aubrey using Tinder. She downloaded the app, found Aubrey's profile, and exchanged phone numbers with him. This allowed the police to finally learn Aubrey's real name, which was Bailey Boswell, a 26-year-old woman. Further investigation revealed that Bailey lived in an apartment near the cell tower where Sydney's phone was last connected. Bailey shared this apartment with her partner, 52-year-old Aubrey Trail. Bailey Boswell, from a normal and wholesome family in Lyons, Iowa, grew up as a friendly and successful student who excelled in basketball and running. However, following her father's death, her life took a downward turn. She started keeping bad company and got involved with alcohol and illicit drugs. On a dating website, Bailey met Aubrey Trail, a man with a history of fraud, issuing fraudulent checks and theft. Aubrey had created a cult where he referred to himself as the Vampire Daddy and paid women $200 weekly to follow his unusual rules. At the time of Sydney's disappearance, Aubrey and Bailey faced a court order to pay over $40,000 in fraud reparations and had multiple misdemeanors against them. On November 19, 2017, they went into hiding. When police searched their apartment, they found that some walls had been scrubbed with bleach, which a neighbor confirmed. After a few days, the police located Aubrey and Bailey at a hotel in Branson, Missouri, and took them into custody a few weeks after Sydney's disappearance was reported. A thorough examination of phone records and Bailey's location data led the police to the gruesome discovery of Sydney's remains. Her body had been dismembered, with 13 parts found in black plastic bags in ditches in Clay County. Tragically, some of her organs, including her heart, were missing. Bailey and Aubrey were charged with first-degree murder, improperly disposing of human remains, and conspiracy to commit a felony. Bailey pleaded not guilty to all 3 charges. Aubrey, on the other hand, pleaded not guilty to felony murder and conspiracy, but guilty to improperly disposing of human remains. However, Aubrey's various statements were inconsistent, and he often appeared confused, changing his account of events and introducing new characters. He made bizarre claims, including that he was a vampire who could fly, and spoke about witchcraft. Aubrey claimed to be a cult leader and vampire, telling authorities he had witches in the cult who needed to kill another woman to gain powers. In one of his early court hearings, Aubrey admitted to killing Sydney Loof, but said it was an accident. He claimed to have paid Sydney $5,000 to participate in a threesome with 2 other women, which Sydney had agreed to. However, during the act, he strangled her with a cord by mistake. Aubrey also confessed to cutting Sydney's body into pieces, a ritual according to his beliefs, to release her soul to the gods in a sacred place. He believed this would help her reincarnate faster. However, the prosecution presented evidence contradicting Aubrey's story. Surveillance footage from November 14th showed Aubrey and Bailey checking into a Lincoln hotel near Sydney's home. The following day, they visited a home improvement store, buying a hacksaw, bleach, a folding saw, a stationary knife, and the bags used to store Sydney's remains. Furthermore, a surveillance camera caught Sydney encountering Aubrey at the Menards store on November 15th, unaware of the danger she was in. On June 11, 2018, the first court hearing took place regarding the murder and improper burial of Sydney Loof. Although separate trials were ordered for Bailey and Aubrey, the charges against them were essentially the same. The trials were held in Lexington because the defense attorneys successfully argued that a fair trial would be impossible in Wilbur due to the extensive publicity surrounding the case. The prosecution's case rested on the argument that Sydney's death was a premeditated murder, as evidenced by the fact that she was strangled and that the crime was carefully planned and executed. The jury listened to 3 other women who had previously dated Aubrey and Bailey, all of whom they met through Tinder. Each of these women had been intimate with Bailey and had also been involved with Aubrey. One of them shared that she had even gone on a trip with them after they met, during which Aubrey gave her $200 a week and invited her to join his group, which he called Witches, telling her that she would have to torture and kill someone to become a member. Another woman testified that Bailey had discussed breaking her fingers and dissecting a body in detail, revealing her fascination with torture. The prosecution pieced together the events of the fateful evening of November 15, 2017. Sydney had arranged to meet a woman she had known for a couple of days, with whom she had been chatting on Tinder. Bailey picked Sydney up from her apartment, and they drove around in his car. The car eventually stopped at Bailey's house, where Sydney was coaxed into the apartment. Once inside, Bailey and Aubrey attacked her, strangling her with an extension cord on the living room floor. Afterwards, Bailey and Aubrey meticulously cleaned the apartment, which the prosecution argued was a premeditated act. The next day, November 16th, they dismembered Sydney's body and dumped her remains in Clay County. The court heard testimony from Jennifer, the landlord, who stated on November 16th, she drove into the garage and immediately noticed a strong chlorine smell that intensified when she entered the house. The medical examiner testified that Sydney's death was ruled a homicide by asphyxiation. Toxicology reports showed that Sydney had antidepressants in her system at the time of death. In addition to the missing organs, the upper left arm, from just above the elbow to below the shoulder, was also found to be missing from Sydney's body. The prosecutors sought the death penalty for both defendants, and if the sentence was deemed unjust, the case would be retried. However, Aubrey denied any involvement in the occult and pleaded guilty only to improperly burying Sydney's remains. During his trial, Aubrey shouted that Bailey had no involvement in Sydney's death, claiming Bailey's innocence. In a dramatic turn, Aubrey then slashed his throat 3 times with a razor blade but survived and was detained until he made a full recovery. Aubrey testified he lied about Sydney Loof's death, admitting he met her in 2017 and paid her for illegal activities. He claimed Sydney died accidentally during an intimate act with an extension cord in November 2017. Aubrey confessed to dismembering and dumping her body, but maintained it was an accident, and he didn't seek help because he thought no one would believe him. Aubrey confessed to getting rid of Sydney's body, claiming it was an accident from an extension cord during intimate act. Bailey denied involvement, with her lawyers saying she was also a victim of Aubrey's manipulation. However, phone records and location data proved Bailey's involvement, tracking her near where Sydney's body parts were found. The court learned that Bailey initiated contact with Sydney and arranged a meeting. Bailey drove to Sydney's duplex on the evening of November 15th to pick her up. The prosecution claimed that Bailey took pleasure in discussing cruel acts and enjoyed talking about torture with Aubrey. Evidence presented in court revealed a planned crime on the day Sydney was killed. Bailey and Aubrey went to Home Depot around noon that day, where they bought tools, including a hacksaw, scissors, and a box cutter, as part of their plan. Bailey sent Sydney a text message inquiring about her day, and phone records and surveillance footage show that she sent the message from the Menards parking lot, where Aubrey was also present. Sydney, who worked at Menards, seemed unaware of Bailey's presence. A few hours later, Bailey sent Sydney another message on Tinder, stating that she was at Sydney's apartment and would pick her up soon. However, phone records indicate that instead of going on a date as Sydney believed, Bailey and Aubrey went to the apartment where they lived. Bailey's attorney, Todd Lancaster, argued that the evidence only showed that Bailey was guilty of aiding and abetting the improper disposal of Sydney's body by buying bleach in garbage bags. On November 8, 2021, Bailey Boswell received a life sentence. The Loof family had waited 3 long years, grieving and yearning for their Sydney, anticipating a verdict that would bring them solace. Prior to this, on July 11, 2019, a jury took less than 3 hours to convict Aubrey Trail of premeditated conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and improper burial of human remains. A 3-judge panel described his crime as cold and calculated. In the trial's second phase, determining whether he should face execution, county prosecutors secured the death penalty for Aubrey Trail, fulfilling their promise. Consequently, on June 9, 2021, Aubrey Trail was put to death by lethal injection. Aubrey Trail, the con artist accused of brutally murdering Nebraska woman Sydney Loof, allegedly deceived his cult followers by claiming to be a flying mind-reading vampire with a coven of 12 witches. He claimed these witches gained their powers by killing people. Fortunately, in this real-life story, justice prevailed, and through the trial, the monster faced the end of his trail. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Kirsten Hatfield. Kirsten Hatfield was born on February 12, 1989, in Midwest City, Oklahoma. Kirsten's father left the family soon after her birth, and her mother, Shannon, moved back in with grandparents. When Kirsten was 2 years old, they moved to their own home. Later, Shannon remarried, but the marriage was short-lived, leaving Shannon to care for her 2 young daughters alone. Kirsten, being the older sibling, took on a lot of responsibility, helping her mother care for her younger sister, Faith. Kirsten and Faith shared a bedroom, while their mother slept in the adjacent room. On May 13, 1997, Shannon put her daughters to bed as usual. Kirsten was 8 years old, and Faith was 3. However, Faith had already fallen asleep, so Shannon only said goodnight to Kirsten and left the door to their room slightly open, as she always did, in case Kirsten or Faith needed her. At around 3 a.m., Shannon was awoken by a noise coming from the girls' room. Thinking one of her daughters was awake, Shannon got out of bed to check on them. As she approached the door, the noise stopped. Assuming her daughters had gone back to sleep, Shannon was about to return to her room when she noticed that the door to their room was now completely closed. This was unusual, as she was certain she had left it slightly open. She wondered if one of them had closed the door or if she had simply forgotten to leave it open. Shannon opened the door slightly to check, but she didn't enter the room before returning to bed. Shannon went to wake up her daughters at 6:30 a.m. the next morning, but only found Faith in their bedroom. Shannon asked Faith where Kirsten was, and when Faith said she didn't know, Shannon began a thorough search of the house. However, Kirsten was nowhere to be found. Shannon then checked outside the house and contacted the parents of Kirsten's friends to see if she had come to their house. But no one had seen her. Shannon's search efforts led her to call her father, who lived nearby, to see if Kirsten had gone to his house or not. Unfortunately, he hadn't seen her either. At this point, Shannon realized Kirsten was missing, and her father advised her to call the police. When the police arrived, they initially thought Kirsten might be hiding in the house or had simply wandered off for a walk, given the town's low crime rate. However, upon inspecting Kirsten's room, they found the window slightly open with a few drops of blood on the frame. This raised their suspicions that something more serious had occurred. Further investigation led them to discover a piece of children's underwear stained with blood on the ground outside the window. After confirming with Shannon that the underwear belonged to Kirsten, the police realized they were likely dealing with a kidnapping. More officers were called to the scene to assist with the investigation, which marked the beginning of a more extensive search for Kirsten. The police investigation into Kirsten's disappearance began with a search of the area around the house. During this search, the police spoke with Kirsten's mother, who reported hearing a noise at 3 a.m. and now realized that it may have been the sound of her daughter being taken. Despite the search, nothing suspicious was found, and the police began canvassing the neighborhood, speaking with all the residents. Unfortunately, none of the neighbors reported seeing or hearing anything unusual on the night of the abduction. However, one neighbor did mention being woken up by a barking dog around 3 a.m., which coincided with the time of the abduction. With no solid leads, investigators turned to a child psychologist to interview Faith, who was only 3 years old. Despite her young age, Faith was able to share what she had witnessed, but her statement was limited to a single phrase: "A bad person came and took my sister." This confirmed that Kirsten had not left the house voluntarily, but unfortunately, it did not provide any further information about the perpetrator or Kirsten's whereabouts. Detectives had to restart the investigation practically from scratch. Their initial suspicion leaned towards someone who knew Kirsten well, as it seemed unlikely that a stranger could abduct her from her own room without a sound. Working on this theory, police discovered that Kirsten's mother, Shannon, had a history of drug-related problems. The detectives considered the possibility that the abduction might be related to this. Perhaps the mother owed money to some people in the criminal underworld, and they decided to take her daughter as payment. The police did not rule out the mother willingly handing over her daughter. This would explain why the abduction happened almost silently. The investigation into Kirsten's disappearance continued, with detectives initially speaking to Shannon, her mother. Shannon denied any involvement, claiming to have been clean from substance abuse for some time and insisting she would never harm her daughter. Although detectives were not convinced of Shannon's innocence, they could not find any evidence to prove her involvement. The police then turned to the public for help, using the media to ask for any information that might be relevant to the case. In response, they received hundreds of calls, but most of the calls were fruitless. However, one clue provided a promising lead. A woman reported her boyfriend's suspicious behavior, including aggressive outbursts and a disturbing threat he made during an argument. The police investigated the man and discovered that he knew Shannon's brother, which meant Kirsten might have known him too. Additionally, the man had a history of drug use and assault, and he had previously been familiar with the Hatfield family home. Despite this, the investigation ultimately found that the man had a solid alibi for the time Kirsten went missing. Multiple witnesses confirmed that he was at a bar until around 4 a.m. on the night of the disappearance, making it impossible for him to have abducted Kirsten. Detectives pursued multiple leads, but each one led to a dead end. As time passed, the hope of finding Kirsten alive began to fade. Kirsten's mother, Shannon, refused to give up. She took matters into her own hands, determined to find her daughter. She gave interviews to local media outlets, distributed flyers, and even investigated potential suspects on her own. However, Shannon faced numerous obstacles. Many local businesses refused to display Kirsten's flyers, citing company policies. She also attempted to meet with the state governor, but was unsuccessful. Shannon established a volunteer center to help find Kirsten. The center focused on distributing flyers and engaging with the media. However, Shannon encountered new challenges. Some volunteers stole money, lied about their work, and used the media to gain attention for themselves. Despite these setbacks, Shannon persevered in her search for the truth. After years of effort, Shannon realized that her approach was not yielding results. She enrolled in college, earned a degree in criminology, and became a parole officer. Shannon's goal was not only to find her daughter's kidnapper but also to protect others from potentially dangerous criminals who might be released from prison. Shannon suspected Kirsten's kidnapper had a history of violent crimes. To pursue this lead, she researched people with violent pasts in her area but found no connection to Kirsten's disappearance. Despite her efforts, she eventually had to accept that Kirsten might have passed away and might not return. Still, Shannon continued to search for answers. Periodically, police reopened the case to investigate new leads, working with the FBI to create an updated sketch of Kirsten's possible appearance. In 2014, there was a breakthrough in the Kirsten case. A woman contacted the police and shared a shocking discovery she had made while sorting through her late mother's belongings. Among her mother's possessions was a diary detailing the woman's father's confession, claiming he had killed Kirsten Hatfield. The diary was extremely detailed, and detectives were convinced of its accuracy. According to the diary, the man had kidnapped Kirsten from her bedroom, took her to a house he owned in a nearby town, and murdered her after horribly torturing her. The description of the crime process spanned many pages, leaving even veteran investigators confused. The diary also revealed that the crime had been recorded on a videotape. Investigators immediately questioned the woman's father. However, his reaction was surprising. While he denied any involvement in the Kirsten case, he asserted that he had known who was responsible for Kirsten's death, saying the murder had occurred at his ex-girlfriend's house. The police were confused and asked for the house address. They quickly received a warrant and sent a team to thoroughly search this house. The forensic investigation began with a crucial step: the use of luminol, a substance that glows when exposed to very small amounts of blood. When the forensic team applied luminol to the scene, they were surprised by the results. An expert later described the house as lit up like a Christmas tree due to the numerous bloodstains. The bloodstains matched the details of the murder described in the diary, leading the team to believe they had finally found concrete evidence. To investigate further, police removed the floorboards, cut out sections of wallpaper and sent these items to a laboratory for analysis. They also organized an excavation team in the hope of finding the victim's body. In addition, the police also discovered a box containing hundreds of videotapes in the house, so they had to review the diary. They suspected that one of the tapes might have contained footage of the victim being abused. Detectives meticulously reviewed each tape, but after hours of analysis, none of the tapes were related to the murder. Excavations also proved fruitless, with no remains or evidence found in the soil. However, just when the investigation seemed to have been gaining momentum, the police encountered an unexpected and shocking episode. Experts who analyzed the bloodstains in the house concluded that the bloodstains had actually belonged to an animal, not a human. This revelation left the police stunned and wondering what had just happened. Had someone deliberately deceived them with a cruel joke? Or was the person writing the diary struggling with mental health issues and convinced by a false narrative that had developed in their mind? The truth was still unknown. Detectives had run out of leads in Kirsten's case, and the case was once again stalled. In an effort to revive the investigation, the case was reassigned to a new detective named Daryl Miller in the summer of 2015. Miller decided to start from scratch and review all existing documents and records. During his scrutiny, Miller discovered something surprising. His predecessors had overlooked some key evidence, including blood found on Kirsten's windowsill and on her underwear. The evidence had been stored in a warehouse, but shockingly had never been sent to a laboratory for analysis. Miller suspected that the reason for this might have been because police initially thought the blood belonged to Kirsten, which would not have yielded any useful results. However, Miller decided to send them to the laboratory for analysis. The results were surprising. The blood sample did not belong to Kirsten, but to an unidentified man. This was a significant breakthrough after many years of investigation. Miller decided to collect DNA samples from all the men who had participated in the investigation since the kidnapping. Police tracked down each person on the list and sent their DNA to a lab for analysis. Everyone was cooperative and provided their DNA samples quickly. Miller patiently waited for the results, and finally he received a call from the lab. Experts had analyzed one of the samples and found a perfect match with bloodstains found on the window and the victim's underwear. The DNA belonged to Anthony Palma, 56. The Hatfield family's neighbor who lived across the street. Anthony had been one of the first people the police spoke to on the day of the abduction. At the time, he claimed to have woken up around 3 a.m. due to his dog barking. Now that his DNA had been linked to the crime scene, detectives decided to bring him in for further questioning. Although the DNA evidence was sufficient for a conviction, the investigators hoped to obtain a confession from Anthony. A confession would expedite the trial and potentially lead them to Kirsten's body, which was still missing. To get Anthony to talk, the detectives invited him for questioning, telling him it was a routine process. They claimed they were re-interviewing everyone, including neighbors, to gather new information. In reality, their goal was to get Anthony to admit whether he had ever been inside the Hatfield family home. Detectives asked Anthony to recall any additional details about the night in question. He retold the same story he had shared 18 years earlier. But this time he added a new detail. He claimed to have seen a white car parked outside Kirsten's house, although he didn't think much of it at the time. The police then asked Anthony about his relationship with Kirsten and her family. He stated that he knew them as neighbors, but he had never interacted with Kirsten personally. He maintained that he got along well with the other neighborhood children, who would often ask him for help fixing their bikes or visit him for candy. This conversation became a critical point in the investigation, as the police had discovered Anthony's blood on the windowsill of Kirsten's bedroom. When they asked if he had ever entered the house, Anthony claimed he had not. This statement raised suspicions, as the presence of his blood suggested otherwise. The detectives faced a challenge. Anthony's blood was fresh, suggesting it had been left recently, but he had had a visitor to the house when it belonged to a friend. The investigators decided to move forward with the interrogation, informing Anthony that his blood had been found in Kirsten's room and on her underwear. Anthony repeatedly denied ever entering the house, despite the evidence to the contrary. The investigators attempted to extract a confession, but he consistently maintained his innocence. The detectives changed their approach and exited the room, leaving Detective Miller to speak with Anthony privately. Miller entered with a photo of Kirsten, placing it in front of Anthony. However, Anthony promptly pushed the photo away, refusing to look at it for the remainder of the conversation. Miller asked various questions, attempting to prompt Anthony into a confession, but he continued to deny any involvement. Failing to obtain an admission of guilt, the police ended the interrogation and apprehended Anthony. A subsequent search of his residence, made possible by a search warrant, uncovered no evidence of Kirsten's remains or any other relevant evidence. During the trial, Anthony repeatedly denied any involvement in the crime. But DNA evidence told a different story. As the trial progressed, new details emerged that the police had initially overlooked. It was revealed that Anthony had a history of run-ins with the law, including a prior conviction for breaking into a girl's bedroom and assaulting her. He had also been imprisoned in the 1980s for a violent attack involving a weapon. Anthony's past convictions signaled his dangerousness, yet were overlooked in 1997. In 2017, a jury returned a guilty verdict for Kirsten's kidnapping and Kirsten's murder, and Anthony was sentenced to life in prison. Despite the guilty verdict, Anthony never disclosed the location of Kirsten's body. Kirsten's mother refused to give up hope, however. She consistently reached out to Anthony, calling and visiting him in prison, in an effort to find out where Kirsten's body was. She spent hours trying to extract the truth from him, but ultimately, she was unsuccessful. Tragically, in 2019, Anthony was killed by his cellmate, who was motivated by a desire for revenge for Anthony's horrific crime against a child. As a result, Kirsten's family's only hope of finding Kirsten's body now depends on hikers or tourists who might stumble upon it in remote national parks, where Anthony may have buried her.